we've talked so far about families as systems from a functional and structural point of view, right? So we've talked about the processes by which families pursue their goals and monitor whether or not they're on task for achieving those goals. And we've talked about the different ways that families organize themselves around roles and power and control and affection patterns, right? So that's the elements of structure and function. But then, as we remember when we started, we talked about the third element of family life, and that was the culture of the family. And so what I'm going to talk about today is the culture of families and some elements of those. When we think about the family culture, one of the first things we can think about is the identity that families have and the identities that family members develop within their families. And so we can think of the family as having an identity itself, and we can also think of it as each of their members, to some degree, their individual identities are created and contained within the interaction patterns that they have with other family members. And so that's part of this culture. It's a set of meanings about who are we and who am I in this context. So identities are internalized sets of expectations for behavior in particular social contexts. At the individual level, when we think about someone's identity, their identity is how should I act? What's the expectation for how I should act in a particular situation? If it's a family identity, it has to do with how should I act as part of a family. And those expectations for how I should act are things that I internalize based upon how other people around me react to me. So I learn what people expect of me by their reactions to my behaviors. And so the behaviors of family members might be different than the behaviors of non-family members to the same behavior. And so my identity might be different in two different contexts, right? And so when we talk about identities, they're based on what we call reflected appraisals of others. Reflected appraisals are contained in other people's reactions to us. So when I say something, or I do something, or I wear a particular kind of clothing, or I comb my hair a particular way, or don't comb my hair, or whatever, people react. And their reactions tell me something about what is the meaning of that behavior. Is it appropriate or non-appropriate? And so I learn how to represent myself, both in terms of my appearance as well as in the kinds of behaviors that I have towards other people. Whether I'm nice or mean to them, or whether I'm competitive with them, it doesn't matter. There's a wide array of possible things that I could learn from my behaviors as to which ones are appropriate and what kind of behaviors are inappropriate given the situation. So we call that reflected appraisals of others. Whenever someone who's close to us, and particularly if it's a parent or what we call a significant other, someone whose opinion we greatly value, usually because we're very interdependent with them, we need them in our life, then we want to fulfill their expectations for us. And so we change our behaviors so that we get the right kind of reactions from them. And so those reactions are called reflected appraisals. Every time someone acts in a particular way in reaction to us, they're basically, to some extent, telling us what kind of person we are. To the extent that they're telling us what kind of person we are, or whether our behavior is appropriate, that element of their reaction is what we call a reflected appraisal. And this contains in what Cooley called the looking glass self. This is how we learn who we are. We're not born with being anybody. The only person that we are is the person that we realize in our social interactions with others that gets a reaction. And we want to have reactions that are predictable. Because we can't go through our life just constantly randomly acting in situations. We generally want to figure out, well, what is the right way to act so that I know and can anticipate how other people are going to react, and then that allows me to plan my life, to plan future actions, right? And so maintaining an identity requires conformity to expectations. So the identity that we start to build early in our life gets sustained through getting consistent responses from the people in our family of orientation, the family we grew up in. And then as we move out of that family, we then seek others who will react to us in ways which usually are fairly consistent with that family of origin reactions because that's where our identity is at that point. We've internalized how family will react to us. We then act in our outside family life, and we expect others to respond in similar ways. They don't, then we have a bit of a dilemma, and we're not really comfortable. We go interact with somebody else who will react to us in ways that are consistent with the identity that we've built up by internalizing all those interactions and all those expectations that our family of origin had for us. And so it's a very driving force in our family behavior, in our day-to-day behaviors. We can tolerate some differences because we say, well, the situation is different. And so I have an identity that's a family identity, and then I have a work identity that might be different, have different elements to it. And so we can partition it to some degree. Changing an identity requires changing others' expectations through repetition of alternative behaviors and communication. So as I grow up in this family of origin, I develop an identity. People come to see me as a certain kind of person based upon my behaviors and the consistency that I find in that I exhibit in my behaviors. Then, as I get older in that same family, I change. Okay? And probably the biggest place where we see change is in adolescence. And so my parents still see me a particular way as a child, but now I'm out in other environments and I'm having a hard time fitting their expectations for me, that identity that I developed as a child, in with what these new people that I am thrust into a new environment with are expecting me. And at the same time, I'm seeing myself physically different. And so I'm wondering, well, maybe that's a reason. And I start to think, well, I need to change my identity. But in order to do that, I'm going to have to change the whole family system. It's going to have to change to accommodate me, right? And so I need to get them to agree that I'm something different. Another case where this happens is in major life course transitions in families. So when families have their first child. Okay, so who am I? Well, I was a wife or a husband before. Now I am a parent. Now I'm still a husband or a wife, but I'm also a parent. And so being a parent might have special meaning for me based upon what I grew up internalizing as the role of a woman or a man in family life. And so all of a sudden to the forefront come those new expectations for how I think I should behave based upon my previously established identity standards. In order for me to be that person, however, I'm now living in a new family with a spouse, and my spouse is going to have to agree. Because I can't be that kind of parent unless my spouse agrees to be something that's complementary. Okay? So if I think that as a parent, I want to be this over-involved super mom, and I want to be the one that takes care of the child and breastfeeds till the child is 6 years old, or, you know, this is this new intensive parenting, right? Mm-hmm. It's very mother-centered. Well, am I going to have a possibility of being married to a husband who wants to be involved in primary child care? Probably not. He's going to have to give that up. Right? I'm taking over. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that's going to put a lot of pressure on that relationship. So people are constantly negotiating identities in families. They try to find some place, and you know, you're not going to marry someone unless beforehand you have some idea that they're going to fit with you, that their idea of being a husband is your idea of being, is consistent with your idea of being a wife. They're going to have to play off of your expectations for being a wife in terms of how they perceive themselves to be a husband. They're going to have to fit in. If they don't, you generally don't marry them, hopefully. Right? Ideally, you'll have had enough time with them before you get married to discuss the idea of what it is to be a husband and a wife, and to think about what your patterns will be, and to maybe play them out a little and see if you are compatible in that regard, or to change your identities in ways that make you compatible so that then you can go forward and face the new events that you're going to face as a married couple and as a family. And so that's usually what happens, but sometimes these things can come out of focus. Sometimes two people can really fit together as husband and wife, but when they have a child, all of a sudden, everything falls apart because a different identity comes to the forefront and becomes more salient than the spousal identity. Now, the parent identity. The parent identity might not be something that the couple has talked about ahead of time. So this is an example of how identities, as a part of the cultural system of families, really play a role in the dynamics of those families and their abilities to maintain a satisfying relationship amongst family members, and to a large extent their ability to adapt to circumstances that they're going to face going forward as a family. There are two levels of individual identity that we can talk about and that require some level of integration. So, as I said, you're a family member and your identity develops in the context of that family culture, but you're also something else. You also have certain other characteristics that transcend the family. And so we call those your master identities or your master status identities. And so you have a certain gender, race, or ethnicity, and social class origins, which themselves place a broader sense of expectations for your behaviors. Now, usually your family reacts to you in ways that are consistent with these broader master status identities. And so when your parents react to you, if you're a girl versus a boy, they have different reactions to your behaviors that create expectations that then push you in a certain direction versus another. So they're reacting, those parental reactions are shaped by your master status. Okay. Then there's specific organizational identities, and these are based on roles negotiated in social relationships. And so this is the discussion that I just had about how when we get married, we have to negotiate what it means to be a husband and wife. Because there's not going to be exact agreement. And so we're going to have to figure that out. How do I fit my identity with yours in ways that make us compatible and make it that we can live with each other and be happy and satisfied? So if I need to change something, I need to change you. And if you want to change, you need to change me. We need to do this together, right? And they vary across organizational contexts, but must have some consistency. So the kind of person that I am as a husband and as a father, both within the context of my family, is going to have to play out in my identity as a professor, as a member of my community, or a member of some group that I belong to. To some degree, I can't be a very different kind of person in every setting.
Is that kind of why, like, they say that interracial couples don't normally work out as well?
Yeah, well, actually, there's a general understanding that interracial couples don't work out, but in actuality, they work out quite well. Okay. But this would be a reason why you would expect them to be more challenged. Okay. And maybe the reason they work out is because they are people who into those kinds of arrangements are capable of making the changes they need to make and do something to isolate themselves from overly stereotyped environments. And so because that race is a master identity, those couples do face a lot of challenges that other couples don't face, right? So a biracial family, say African American and Caucasian or Anglo, with a child. And until that child goes to school, they're pretty capable of managing the environments in which they operate. They can choose networks of people and organizations that don't see them based upon their race, but see them based upon their other personal characteristics. Okay? They might, if they have families that object, they might avoid those families, those extended family members, to try to create an environment in which they can be who they want to be as a couple. Problem is, when their child goes to school, guess what? They face an organizational context that cares about race and identity. And so research, probably 10 years ago, I was at a conference and this woman was doing a presentation on biracial couples. And one of the things she talked about was how when their kids went to school, they faced a racial identity crisis for themselves and for their child, because they had to fill out on the form their race. And there was no category for anything but straight categories. And they objected to having to do that, because every time they do that, they then make a choice. And they were vehement. They shouldn't have to make a choice, because they didn't see themselves as black and they didn't see themselves as white. And so they wanted to push the organizational structure around them, in this case the educational system, to alter itself to accommodate them, and the argument was they have every right to be accommodated, that this actually disrupted their individual identities as they worked them out and negotiated with each other, as well as caused problems for what we're going to talk about next, their family identity. They had gone to great lengths to create a notion of who they were as being neither black nor white, and not even being some black and some white, but being a meld. And that's how they saw their relationship. And anytime they came into contact with organizations that couldn't understand that, it was problematic for them. Now, one of the articles I'm going to have you read from Monday actually is really nice in this regard. It's looking at adoptive families and the ways in which they tell stories in their day-to-day family life to build their family identities in ways that make it possible for other people to realize what they're about. Because most other families are not adopting families. And so how do they fit in? And they do this by seeking reflected appraisals from others, not as individuals, but as families. And they do that by telling stories about their family. And they tell the stories to other people. And when they tell the stories, then people understand who they are. Okay. There are two sources of development of individual identity, and one is socialization. We learn it from our parents. We get basically responded to and sometimes punished for going the wrong directions and rewarded for going in other directions. And that creates internalized expectations for what we should be focused on. We get encouraged to do certain things. Growing up, we read in storybooks that we're read to by our parents. We see, oh, that's a girl, I'm a girl. That's how I behave. I'm a boy, that's a boy, this is how boys behave. So we learn those lessons and we create those expectations for ourselves by observing others. And then later on, once we were able to develop a sense of who we are, because we do this without thinking, without reflecting, oh, I'm a boy, therefore I should act this way. We don't actually do that, right? We just, because we're a boy and we see another boy who's presented to us as someone who is appropriate, we then internalize that for ourselves. We don't get the sense that I'm a boy. That gradually evolves throughout childhood, right? So we start to see, well, there's boy's side and there's the girl's side. Oh, I'm a boy. That's my part, right? We become self-reflective, and when we become self-reflective, that's when we can start negotiating what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl. And that's usually in early adolescence that begins. Now, where are we going to do that negotiation? Well, since our identity is mostly based in that early family life, one of the most important places to negotiate that is with our other family members. And so research on coming out experiences of gay and lesbian youth are pretty significant, because this is the most challenging place to change that identity. How do I negotiate with my parents that I'm not heterosexual? They are. So that might be a particular problem given other aspects of our family culture. It might be very difficult for them to accept that ever, which makes it really difficult for those children, because those family members are where sexual orientation is only one part of who you are. There's a whole other part there that's really clearly linked to that family of origin. And so often the coming out experience tends to work more indirectly, tends to be more maybe focused on siblings who might be more understanding, or aunts or uncles who might be more understanding, and then gradually create that revelation for parents in those circumstances. But it is a negotiation process. It's getting other people to think about you differently and to not expect you to act in ways that are inconsistent with the new identity that you've developed, be it a family of origin member or be it a spouse. Okay, so that's individual identity. Individual identity is pretty easy to understand, I think, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of know who you are. I know who I am to some degree. I mean, there's an ambiguity in there. Some people have less ambiguity than others. And there's a whole field of adolescent development and identity theory that talks about different kinds of identities, foreclosed and ambiguous, etc. And so people vary in those regards. What is family identity, though? What do we mean when we say family identity? Who are we as a family?
Maybe like how we are together, like what we are together.
Okay.
Like
what does that mean, like how we are together?
Well, like some families, like based on like what they do together could determine their family identity, like who they are in their community, what they do on their free time, and kind of on that idea, like if they're very into their church, or if they're very an outdoorsy family, or if they're very like educationally driven.
So it's shaped by shared kinds of activities?
Yeah,
to some degree, yeah. So it's a shared sense, family identity itself is a shared sense of belongingness. We can identify that we have a family, and the people in it orient to it and say, we are a family. We might not be able to articulate what that is, but we identify that we are part of a system that involves specific other people in a specific set of relationships that are unique from other kinds of relationships we have with other people. So in a sense, it's a sense of belongingness accompanied by a shared understanding of our origins, our shared history, our current circumstances, and future expectations for continued interaction. So you can see in this definition, we are part of a group. The group began. The group began with mom and dad getting married. Actually began before that, grandma and grandpa getting married. But most recent history is mom and dad got married. What was that about? What was their marriage about? How did it begin? Do we all know stories? You know stories of your parents' beginnings?
Yeah.
Right? The whole family kind of knows, so this is the story. This is how it started. Right? It started in an elevator. Right? It involved certain kinds of activities. My family began waiting for an elevator and evolved around going to art museum. Okay. So this was the beginning. And it had a period of time in it that there was maybe, so this is the shared history. There was a period of time before a child was born. And this was what life was like then as a couple. And then when the child was born, this was how it got transformed. And we kind of have a history, kind of have a storyline that says that we are an ongoing thing. We are an entity. It has origins, it has a history, it has current circumstances. And today, this is what our family is about. It's morphed into something different. Okay? And then it has future expectations for continued interaction. And so we as a family see ourselves going forward in this way. So we can actually reflect on what a family is. That's our family identity. It's consisted of all those things. It gets realized in various ways. It gets built and shaped through a variety of processes. And so that's what I want to talk about next. How are these identities created? One is we're inherited from our sociocultural background. So my family is a white middle class family, or maybe a white educated class family. Okay. My family growing up was a working class, white working class family, quite different. Had different implications about, I would say, oh, that's a white working class family versus that's a white educated family. Would you think differently about the nature of those family lives? Mm-hmm. Is there an image that we have in our society about what that means in terms of the nature of the interactions? Yes. Mm-hmm. And does that image then, is it a reflection of reality for those families who are identified that way by their race, ethnicity, and social class? To some degree, yes. To some degree, those families are the kinds of things that shape their lives, their experiences together are shared with other families from the same race, ethnicity, or social class background. And they develop ways of managing their lives and dealing with their circumstances that are borrowed from other people in their, what Foucault would call habitus, their cultural group. And so they reenact those patterns and they become real. And they become internalized as part of their family identity, internalized in the form of their interactions with each other and the meanings that they shape around those interactions. And so that's, to some degree, our family identity is shaped by our sociocultural factors. But it's also shaped more personally by shared experiences as a group, separate from other groups. So our family and what it is about at any given point in time, because these identities can shift and change, just like an individual identity can shift and change, right? So those identities get enacted, or maybe a better term is objectified, through a set of shared experiences. We do things together as a group in a particular way that makes us distinctive from other groups, other families. And they become our markers of who we are. And so we understand what our roles are as individuals within those events. We understand how we behave in those events. We understand how those events will unfold. And these things we call rituals. So we develop these things called rituals that become what we're about. Or shape or reflect what we're about. When I was growing up, my father would go away for the week. He'd come home on the weekend because we were a racetrack family, and so he would go wherever the races were. Sometimes he had to go to, drive 300 miles away, and he'd stay there during the week, and he'd come home. And whenever he came home, there was this great explosion that happened. He'd drive up that driveway, and there was a ritual of going out there and just jumping on him, and then he'd come in, and we'd always know exactly what he would do. He'd always go sit in that same chair, get a beer, sit in the same chair, get out his crossword puzzle, and do the crossword puzzle. And he would always have his khaki pants on, because he always wore khaki pants to work. That was his, wasn't an official uniform, but that was what his uniform was. He always wore the same clothes. And then, after dinner or something like that, we would always get a ride on his knee, right? He'd cross his legs, and he'd put us on the end of his foot, and we'd do this riding thing, right? In some ways, that ritual around his coming home was important for our family identity. It marked our family identity, right? We were participants in this family system that included a father who wasn't there 5 days a week, right? But when he came home, these rituals integrated him back in, like he was never gone. And in some ways, they really linked us to what he did when he was gone. Now, probably every parent jogs their child on their... We did it every single week. And in some ways, it was part of what he was and what we were connected to outside of our family that then shaped our interactions with each other. And so we had this ritual that kind of was important in shaping our understandings of who we were, that we were worthy, that we were together, and who was part of the family. And by playing up this return, it was, because he wasn't there all the time, it was fairly important for maintaining our notion of who we were as a family, right? Mm-hmm. Another way that we shape identities is through ongoing and changing narratives. We tell stories. We tell stories about what our family is, about those experiences that we've had. They could be stories about our genetic or sociocultural origins. So on the one hand, social cultural factors play a role in identifying who we are. But on another level, we just don't accept those. We can modify them. So we can tell the story of what it means to be black or what it means to be mixed race. And we can tell the story in a way that allows us to live together as a family more effectively in a more satisfying way. And so we create that notion of who we are in terms of our sociocultural origins and also to some degree our genetic origins. I am the product of a family that had an alcoholic parent in it. So that alcoholic parent, because we know, I could create a whole story about the genetic transmission of alcoholism and how that then shapes who I am now as a family member. That potential to be an alcoholic might be integrated into my family life and why my family does things the way they do. Family of origin experiences, what it was like growing up in the family that I grew up in. So I'm creating a new family. What was my family like growing up? What kinds of things did we do? What kinds of things did I have to go through as a child? The stories I tell about that are going to reflect on what it is my current family is about. My mother used to always talk about having to walk through the snow 5 miles to go to school. Probably every mother talks about that, I think. In some ways, she's telling me school is valuable. I value school. By telling that story, even if it's a lie, right? Because it's never really a lie. It's usually a elaboration. It's a modification of what happened, right? And it's taking experiences and putting them down into a fable or a moral by telling the story of your origins. What you're doing is you're reinforcing in your own family, these are what things we believe in. These are the things that are going to constrain our behaviors, right? And so families create their identities through telling stories of the parent's origin. They construct stories of their marital relationship. When did it begin? How did it unfold? What was those early years like? Were there lots of difficulties? Were there break-offs and getting back together? Were there lots of fights, or was it idyllic? Again, the stories aren't always true, right? If you ask most people, well, what was the story of your marriage relationship? And you ask them that story before they get into trouble later on in their life with the potential for divorce or something of that effect. Well, they're probably going to tell a story that's positive. We're going to shape an image of our life that's positive, because it's going to create that motivation to continue going forward. It's going to create a lot of sort of positive interactions that happen within the group. But if things start to fall apart, we oftentimes reconstruct that story, don't we? Well, it was never all that great. You know, I remember back when, and we bring up incidents that we've never talked about before. Because what we're doing is reshaping our image so that we can go forward as something new as a family. Okay? Now, if it's a divorce and there's children involved, how we do that can be very important. What kinds of stories we tell might have implications for how well our child adjusts to the situation after divorce. We wouldn't want to tell stories about our partner being an awful person or something to that effect. We generally will want to kind of maintain a positive relationship for the child. But some families don't do that. They bring forward a story that's a grittier story, and those children might have more difficulties. So family identity, what was our marriage? We tell stories that reshape what that identity is. So it's never the same. It can always change. Parent-child relationship experiences. Oh, you were a difficult child, right? Or you were the favorite. I get that all the time. I was the favorite. I don't think it's true, you know? But it's part of who we are as a family. I'm considered to be the favorite. I don't know what that means. I don't know how it's affected my life. I guess I never really sat down and thought very much about it, but I'm sure it's there somewhere. But it's part of our identity. And then relationships with extended family. And I should also put on sibling relationships as well, right? So I've talked already about my identity as a family. My family is several segments, groupings of siblings. And when I think of my family identity growing up, I know that my feeling of what my family identity was when I was growing up is different than what my brother would say was the family identity when he was growing up. It shifted. For some reason, something happened in there that changed the whole set of ideas about who we were as a family and what we valued, what was important, what were the important lessons of life. All of that went into that storytelling along the way. When I reflect back on it, I think, oh, that's how my family identity has shifted and changed. So later, I'm going to talk in a minute about rituals, but then later when we have the discussion on next time, we'll talk more specifically about these narratives or these stories that people tell about their families and how they can be very important in how families deal with their circumstances. Some key factors that shape family identities. One is shared understandings of individual members' feelings, behaviors, life goals, and motivations. So who we are as a family involves who are the members and what's important in their life. And so we get to know each other. And as we get to know each other, we understand what's important to them. And that feeds into our understandings of how we are supportive of each other, what are our possibilities in life. For example, knowing that my mother always wanted to have an education. Very important in shaping my family identity, the identity of the family that I grew up in. A real strong value to get an education. To do that, it was what she wanted me to do. Okay. Shared constructions of pre-existing conditions and events, for example, genetic heritage or life cycle events. So, as I said earlier, you know, what is our genetic lineage? How does that then shape how we interact with each other and what we're cautious about? We don't want to fall into the problem of alcoholism or some other kind of genetically proclivities that we might have. Also, life cycle events. Was there a divorce sometime in the past? How do we interpret that divorce? Third, unavoidable existential conflicts shape the identity of our family in the sense of all families are going to struggle to some degree with autonomy versus connectedness, how much autonomy is appropriate, and stability versus change. So are we a changing family? Are we a stable family? To some degree, those identities shift unavoidably as the members change. And so when we go into adolescence, we're going to see more change, we're going to see more autonomy, less connectedness at those stages of our life. A fourth factor that shapes family identities are these what we call transactional patterns that enable or constrain behavior of family members. Some families develop patterns that really can be problematic for their members, and that becomes part of who they are as a family. And so we can talk about double binding. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Okay? I want you to go away and get the best education possible, but you know, I couldn't stand it if you left me. Okay? So what does that do? I mean, if that's an idea that's present in the family culture, what would a student who wants to go to college do in that circumstance? They're stuck in a double bind, right? Or triangulating, putting responsibility on a third party. Oh, if you go to school, you know, if you go away to school, your husband, your dad and I, we'll probably get divorced. You know, like you're the only person holding this thing together. Yeah, I know. It's been done. It's been said. Or, so that would be a triangulating kind of set of patterns that you would find in some families. Do they do a lot of triangulating? Now, triangulating is a conflict resolution or conflict management technique. It's not a good one, but it's one that we often see in families where they can't resolve differences. And so what they do is they triangulate. They escape the difference by offloading onto either another member, or sometimes they triangulate by focusing on work. So if they lose their job, they'll fall apart. Sometimes it's alcohol or drugs. And so the alcohol and drugs become a substitute for what is a problem in the dynamics of the interaction. Scapegoating, allocating individual responsibility for failures. So blaming someone for something. Family life was always terrible. You know, family life, we had a really problem in my family life when my brother was 16 years old. He was the reason. And so families, and they construct the stories of who they are, they might involve scapegoating a particular member as being responsible for negative things. The opposite of use of metaphors to highlight the importance of someone. You are the cog that holds everything together. You are the star. You are the twinkle in my eye. You are my pride and joy. Or you are the family's pride and joy. You are the successful one. Okay? And so that can be an issue for some families' members as well. So if you imagine, I'm drawing on these from an article that actually looked at how we might better advise high school students who are thinking of pursuing a college degree and what kind of degree they are interested in. And this particular article talks about how this can put unrealistic expectations on a teenager in high school in terms of what they wind up going for, even if they realistically know they can't do it, because they need to fulfill these responsibilities because there's pressure from the family. It's not like you have to do it, but it's more of a subtle pressure by using these metaphors to hide the idea that we expect you to be really great. Right? The opposite is we expect you to fail or to cause disaster wherever you go, or if you go away from us, you'll destroy our family. And so these are issues that this article actually argues have to be dealt with by school counselors when they're talking to their students about choosing a college and choosing a degree or a career. These things come up. And then expressions of intimacy, the desire for maintaining closeness. And so this would be a more positive one. You could say to this child, well, we like being close to you, but we can maintain that closeness through email, or we can maintain that closeness through phone calls. So, you know, you're free to go, as opposed to, we don't want you to ever leave us. Okay? The phone calls won't be sufficient. You're going to have to come home every weekend or something to that effect. So you have to choose a place that's close by. If I can go back to this one, the shared understandings of individuals, members' feelings, behaviors, life goals, and motivations. One of the examples they use there in the counseling element was what happens if a child wants to go and get a college education, wants to be an engineer or something to that effect, and has a father who was really talented in the area of science and technology, but lacked the education growing up in his family, and has been always telling that story about how he couldn't go to college, how he had to get a job and sacrifice for his family. Now, how does that child decide they're going to go to college and do something, especially if it's something that they know their parent was denied in his childhood? Makes it very difficult. Family histories, family identity. Part of the family culture is this, are these stories. And they can be very constraining on kids in terms of their choices and decisions. Finally, the article on counseling talks about, oh, what happened? What they call the ethics of due consideration. So families develop sort of ethical guidelines for their members' behaviors that define what's justifiable from the family's perspective. And so elements of this ethics of due consideration are legacy, expectations inherited from previous generations. You need to carry on. You need to carry forward with what we have sculpted and created for you. I always wonder about this with my daughter. She's the daughter of 2 professors. Does she feel the sense of a legacy of higher education because of being the daughter of 2 professors? Well, we've never encouraged that idea, I don't think, very much. Although we certainly have immersed her in the world of higher education when she was growing up. So she probably does feel a little bit of that pressure. And it can be good, or it could be pushing her in a direction that she will never be happy in. And so families have that legacy element to them that oftentimes can result in their members going forward in their lives in ways that might not be most suitable for them. On the other hand, it might also be the legacy is strong and there's enough background that that individual does wind up being successful in spite of the legacy effect. Trustworthiness, the extent to which family members can be counted on or in need of monitoring versus being in need of monitoring and supervision. And so within the context of every family, there's a sense that, hey, you know, this is the kind of person you've already been in this family. You can't be trusted. Or this person can be trusted. And so they can be given more leeway. They don't have to be watched as closely. Merit, credit given to family members based on an acknowledgement of the contributions to family goals. So the extent to which your family considers that you have merit, that you've made contributions, you've done things that have enhanced the family life and enhanced the achievement of family goals. The extent to which families have, or members have earned entitlement within families. So expectations for favor based on previous contributions. And so are you entitled to something in your family life? Do you feel entitled?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel entitled relative? Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I have a brother.
Do you feel entitled differently than him?
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately, yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Where did that come from?
My college softball playing by my dad, my teaching, my having 2 jobs, and my brother being really indecisive with his major, never really having any athletic interests. And
okay, so you did things that seemed to fit the family culture maybe a little bit more, and got points for doing that. And so you feel a bit entitled relative to your, just to save your face, you don't feel really exorbitantly entitled relative to him.
It's more like my parents put me
Right.
more entitled than they do my brother. Like, they think I deserve more.
But you probably also believe that a little bit too.
Yeah, well, I mean, who doesn't?
See, I feel like I don't feel as entitled. Maybe because everyone's convinced me that I was the favorite, so I don't deserve to be entitled. I don't know. Autonomy, expectations for autonomous action and decision making by family members. So how much autonomy can you be given? And that really depends upon how much you've fulfilled expectations in the past. So these are elements of the family culture that are going to be important for understanding how individuals make decisions in their lives outside of the family, in this case, choosing a school to go to. That family culture is there, and it's real. And these things are playing onto it that may be constraining what those choices are, or maybe pushing those choices in a direction that aren't ideal for the individual as an adult. And so that's a kind of important element, the idea of family culture here. A really good example of this, too, is this movie called Real Women Have Curves. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's a great movie. It's about a Hispanic woman in Los Angeles, a high school girl, and she works in her parents' sweatshop, making dresses for wealthy clients. And she goes to school, and she succeeds, and she's very good. And she gets a full ride scholarship to Columbia University in New York, right? Worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? Both just in tuition costs, never mind the potential for income earning afterwards. But she feels as though accepting it would be disloyal to her family. She feels as though accepting it would create a feeling of inferiority or amongst her father and mother. She feels accepting it would be to be disloyal to her obligations as part of this family, as a firm almost. And so she has to struggle with how she makes that decision. And it's sort of about how the school counselor tries to convince the parents to let her go. Part of that is part of her family culture. Education wasn't part of the family culture. Getting by and being successful getting by, which they were. It was a sweatshop kind of operation. It was a family sweatshop, basically. They sewed dresses for wealthy clients. But that's how they got by. And there were no other opportunities. And so they really were successful at something. But it wasn't the standard way of being successful in American society. Going through the educational system and getting a job and, becoming a lawyer or a doctor or something like that, right? They were under the table kind of operation. And so this avenue that was open to her really was threatening to the family culture. Their sense of who we are and that we're worthy, and you're part of this group and you make us part of that worthy unit. Now you're saying we're not worthy by doing this behavior. And so that's another good example of how family culture can really play a role in the outcomes for individuals.
Will you give her the ending and say she goes to the school?
Huh?
Will you give her the ending?
Yeah, she goes.
Oh, okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion. And actually, the person that wrote this article about integrating family culture ideas into school counseling probably would really like this movie, because it's about the counselor and the counselor going and talking to the family and trying to work with them to reorganize their family story, as opposed to being one of just survival by working in the sweatshop to actually creating something new that was in the legitimate stream of the society. That's sort of an overview of family culture and identity. I next want to talk about one aspect of family culture, and that helps shape identity, and that's the idea of family ritual. Rituals are patterns of behavior with symbolic significance, which may or may not have any kind of manifest function for the family. So when I say a manifest function, what are we doing? We do the same thing every week. What's its purpose? Are we doing it to achieve some goal? Not necessarily. We just do it. It's part of our patterns of life. And it has special symbolic significance. So I think the example of my father coming home every week and the ritual that we had of all piling on top of him, and then his coming and sitting down and playing out that whole scenario. Well, it was just part of it, everyday life. Him coming home, we greeted him. He participated in it because he saw that we got meaning out of it. And then we ate dinner, and then he sat down and he did his crossword, and we left him alone, and then he played with us at the end. That all was part of that special time that integrated him into our family as part of our family, but we didn't do it for that purpose. It was just something that evolved in our day-to-day interactions that took on significance. And actually, for us at the time, we didn't even realize what the significance was. It's only thinking back, oh, I can see what that significance is now. 3 types of rituals that we distinguish between. One is cultural celebrations, and these are things such as Passover, Christmas, Easter, Eid. These are celebrations which are part of the group that we belong to outside the family. So they link, these kinds of celebrations link the family to external cultural institutions and meaning systems. So my family, every year, we celebrated Easter, Christmas, we went to midnight mass. It was part of our family life. Everybody went, except my father, because he wasn't Catholic. We all went. My mother sang in the choir. We listened to her sing. That was all part of Christmas Eve. And then we came home and we opened one present. It's part of our tradition. Okay. Well, going to church as a group really defined us in our community. Everyone knew that we were connected to that church. Therefore, they assumed that we had certain sets of values, we had certain sets of standards in our lives, and they were connected to that religious institution. They wouldn't know that if we practice our religion at home. So that's a kind of celebration that really links us to external institutions. People in that church know who we are. They will, when they saw the children on the street, if the children were without the parents, they would expect that those children would act in particular ways, and they would feel righteous in letting the parents know if they were acting in ways that weren't appropriate. And so not only did they link us to these cultural institutions, but also these meaning systems. This is what it means to be a Christian. And so we had to fulfill those expectations even when we were outside the family, because we were linked to that community through our participation in these observations, in these celebrations. So it helps establish family identity both internally and externally. So we know what we are about in terms of our values. We heard them every Sunday. And we also, everybody in the community knows what we're about as a family. And it reinforces the family value systems. So to the extent that participating in these things, those were the things that we brought into our family as well. And so they were reinforced in our daily lives. A second kind of ritual is what we call family traditions. And these are things like birthdays, anniversaries. They mark changes in family and family members over time. So this is how we keep track of our history, basically. Okay? Remember your 50th? I just talked to my mom when I was visiting the other day. Yeah, that was during your 90th birthday party, or that was your 80th birthday party, your 70th birthday party, and we can actually mark changes in her life based upon what happened at those celebrations. We can actually talk amongst ourselves and say, yeah, her memory's really lost a lot. And then since her 80th birthday to her 90th birthday, you could really tell by her interactions at those points in time. And so they're markers, and they kind of help us sort of assess what's going on in the members' behaviors as well as in the family as a whole. Oh yeah, that was an awful year when we had that party celebrating my parents' 50th anniversary, as opposed to their 30th anniversary. So what was their marriage like at each of those points in time? You can actually use these as yardsticks for measuring things. So they help provide a sense of continuity and coherence. Yeah, same birthday, same party, I'm 3, it's day for my birthday. We're going to do all these things. It's going to be in a particular way. We're going to play pin the tail on the donkey. We're going to have a birthday cake. We're going to have ice cream. We're going to invite certain sets of friends over. And then when I turn 4, I'm going to do it again. And when I turn 5, and I'm, everybody knows that it's going to happen. It's planned for. It's organized. It's detailed. What happened to the games this year? Why didn't we have them? Or how come I didn't get to invite anybody? No. There are expectations that come with it. And so it creates a sense that you're all together, that you can coordinate something like this together, that it's your family's event. And so it gives that special meaning to being a family. So that's this sense of coherence. So we can mark our time, continuity. We have a past. We can mark it with anniversaries, and we can mark it with birthdays. And we have a sense of coherence in the sense that we do it in organized ways every year. So it's got that sense that we are a unit. We function together. Other things might fall by the wayside. We might not do them particularly well, but we always do this well, right? And so it at least establishes ourselves as being okay. I think a lot of couples today, young couples, before they get married, when they're dating or something, they celebrate their 1-year anniversary or 6-month anniversary of being together. In some ways, it kind of, you shouldn't have to do that almost, right? It should just everything should be happy all the way through, but it's not always perfect. And so you have these celebrations to sort of reaffirm, yeah, we're good together. Yeah, we're good together. The next one, oh wait, maybe we're not so good together. It didn't work out well this time. Well, maybe that's telling us something that we've been ignoring problems in the relationship going forward in the past. And now the ritual is going to tell us that it's not working so well. So when you have an anniversary, and every year you buy your partner roses, and then you buy them roses, and you buy them roses, and the next time you forget, right? Tells you something. And so they're really good markers. They provide opportunities for changes in individual and family identities as well. So the ritual will change depending upon where you're at in your own identities. And so the kind of anniversaries you had when you were married for 5 years don't look the same as the anniversaries you have when you're married for 30 years, right? Because you're different people. You have different priorities. You have different things that are important in your life. And so those change the nature of the ritual. And so you recognize that when you celebrate the ritual. You can also have the opportunity to say, well, I don't like where we're going. Let's shift this. Let's change this. And if the ritual changes because it's reflecting a changing in reality of one or both of the members, or more than both of the members, depending upon whether you're talking about the couple or the family. And then pattern interactions themselves also constitute rituals. You don't have to have these events related around some cultural event or some family event. They could be everyday kinds of patterns that families enact. Family meals is a really good one. Families always get together for the evening meal, or my family wasn't necessarily every evening, but it was every Sunday meal. We would all be there. Vacations, going on your annual vacation. Some families did that on a regular basis. It's the second week of August, we're gone. We know that, right? And we know where we're going to go. We're going to go camping, or we know exactly where we're going to go. And then weekends, weekend events can be very important as well. So we ritualize our weekends many times. Now, most families today, the weekends aren't all that family-oriented and not all that planned out, but except for some families. And so families of divorced families with a child, oftentimes weekends are very special times. And what happens on those weekends, and preserving that weekend visit or every other weekend visit, can be really critical in maintaining the notion of the non-custodial parent still being in that child's life. And any failure to have that weekend is why many divorced parents who want to maintain that connection with their children, they'll do anything to make sure that the weekend happens. It's critical. Doesn't matter, anything else in their life will be put on the side because that weekend is what defines them as part of their child's family. And so those weekend patterns, those visitation patterns, can be very critical in sustaining family identity and outcomes for the child and for the parent. So these reinforce existing culture and structure for the most part. They tend to say, hey, this is who we are, this is who's part of the group, these are the people participating, and these are the kinds of behaviors that we enact towards each other. These are the kinds of rules that we comply with. And when we talk during these episodes, we create family identity. We create that culture, right? And so what happens around the dinner table is pretty important oftentimes. So it can help reinforce our culture and our structure and provide a sense of stability and cohesion. We know it. We know our family's there. Sunday dinner. I could mark my life by Sunday dinner. We always ate at 1 o'clock. We went to church, we came home. There were certain procedures that everybody went through, preparing food. Children, depending on who they were, boys or girls, did different things. Certain people set the table. There was places where people sat. Everybody sat in the exact same place every single Sunday. The food was pretty consistent. We pretty much knew what we were going to have, a roast usually of some sort, mashed potatoes and some dessert and some vegetable. Right? And if it was broccoli, we put the broccoli in the mashed potatoes and made forests, and it was all part of enacting the family dinner. And when we were sitting there, we talked about things. I can't remember what we talked about because I was a kid, but probably we talked too much as kids, and we were told that we should be seen and not heard, but that was part of what our culture was. Children are to be seen and not heard. So, and there may have been arguments, and the arguments got hashed out, and peace was created at the family meal. And it actually started before the family meal. It usually started sometime, I can't remember whether it was on Saturday or whether it was on Sunday after church. I think it was on Sunday after church. We would go to the Butcher Boy, which was this butcher shop. And we always went there because my dad got the best cuts because he was a good friend of the guy. So we always got these special deals. And we went there as a group, the kids and my mom, and we bought the roast and we talked to the butcher and we created this connection. And they knew who we were. We were this family. We were this mother duck and her ducklings following along, right? And we trailed in and we trailed out with our goods, and then we went home and we cooked it and shared in it and ate in it. And then afterwards, the girls went in and did the dishes, and the boys and the dad went in and watched football. At halftime, we always went out and played football for a little bit and then came back in and watched the rest of the football game. That was Sunday. At some point, my sisters got older, and we got into conflict in the tradition. It had to change. We had to negotiate because they wanted to watch some movie on the TV. So there was always this fight, and then we had to re-regulate what was important. Somehow, I don't know, somewhere along the line, they gained more power in the family. So they got to watch what they wanted. So the ritual changed, but generally it's reinforcing the idea that we are a family, we do things shared together, and there are certain roles that people occupy in the family, and those roles are played out in the rituals. And this is a particular pattern interaction ritual, the family meal. And these really show those roles. The significance of rituals then is they create family environment linkages. They link the family to external institutions like churches and communities, educational systems, link family culture to broader cultural systems of meaning. So being a Christian family, being a family in which the parents are really participant in the school system, so an education-focused family, for example, or a family that partakes in every year the voting or every other year voting events because they're part of the local party machinations. We went to, when I was a kid, we used to go to bake sale, not bake sales, barbecues and these kinds of things that were sponsored by by the political party that my mother was involved in. Those are who we were. We were a political, education-focused, religious family. That's who we were. Okay. We weren't particularly a sports family, although we were a racetrack family, and probably earlier in my family life it was more around that, and so a lot of traditions were around the racetrack, but when I was growing up it was less of that. And then provide external sources of appraisal to establish identity. How do we verify what kind of family we are? And this is particularly problematic for the parents, the executors of the system. How do we verify that we are the kind of family that we value? Well, what we do is we expose ourselves to people who are the judges of that. People outside of our family, the people in the church, the people at the political events that we attend, that type of thing. And so those people see us and say, yeah, you're part of who we are. And if you're not, if you're acting in ways that are inconsistent, they will work to try to bring you in line. But we need other people to verify these identities. And these rituals, participation in these rituals can often do that. We do it very early in life in the honeymoon. So we are a couple now. How do we verify that we're different? That we're no longer just living together, that we're no longer just dating, that we're now married. And somehow that's more significant and it has more elements to it, more meaning to it. Well, what do we do? We go on a honeymoon where there are lots of people who are also honeymooners, and it's a honeymoon resort where the staff and everybody else looks at us as honeymoons and treats us as new married couples. And then we take lots of pictures of ourselves doing things together in this beautiful idyllic scenery, and we post them on the internet so other people can comment and say, oh, I wish I was there, or, you know, you're such a happy couple, or, right? So we create this image through participating in the ritual, in this case the honeymoon ritual, which is a kind of family ritual, right? Another significance is family coherence, the idea of being a family. So not just that we have a linkage that helps establish that identity, but we actually have a sense that we are a unit. Not from reflected appraisals of others, but simply from our personal experience. And so by participating in the rituals, we reinforce our cultural beliefs and values. We say to each other, this is the things we believe in, and we actually do things that are in line with those beliefs and values. We reinforce family identity and coherence. We reinforce individual identities within the family. So we get to, by participating in this, we reassess who are we? What is our role? How am I created in the context of these other people? How do they see me? I play out that role within the context of the ritual, and I reinforce family cohesion and belongingness. It's us that are doing this. Other people, we don't usually invite. There was never a time, or very rarely was there a time, that there would be someone other than a family member at the Sunday dinner table. It was family. Okay? If we were having someone over for dinner, it would usually be at another time. Okay? And in some ways, you remember those things too, because they're deviations from the ritual. And then adaptive functions of ritual provide information about system and individual functioning. So when you partake in the ritual, you understand that someone's changed, or someone's not behaving in ways that are predictable within the context of a routine. It's always done this way. Why are you doing something different? Okay? Years ago, I made a decision to leave the annual 4th of July picnic of my family. I was going to go to the beach to go and see Three Dog Night in concert. You probably don't even know who Three Dog Night is, right? They did this song called "One Is the Loneliest Number."
Oh yeah. Okay, I know that song.
Well, it's oldie. It's an old oldie. So I'm leaving. Never before would I have left the ritual of the 4th of July picnic. It was an important event It was a fun time. But I was different. I was 17 or 16. I think it was 17. I was going to be 17. I was 16. It was different. I was different. I'm independent. This is kid stuff. I'm going to go to the beach. So I hitchhiked to the beach.
What?
Right? My mother let me go. She kind of said, well, this is the 4th of July. You're supposed to be here. But then she kind of saw this autonomy and kind of said, oh, okay, I need to. So there was some allowance there. But it was a clear indication that by doing that, I was saying, I'm separate. And I'm getting this new autonomy. It was a really bad decision, by the way.
Oh, no.
Got a ride with a guy that hit a house at about 90 miles an hour. So it was like I don't think we ever had another 4th of July picnic afterwards. No, we did.
Oh, I was like, oh my gosh.
But I mean, it was, that aside, my choosing not to participate was significant in meaning. Because the event, the ritual, was significant. It was a family event. It was a sense of togetherness. And when I decided not to be part of it, that decision had meaning. It only had meaning because the event had meaning. It had a certain element to it that said you should participate, right? You have an obligation, an expectation to participate. And you actually might even have a role. You might be the person that toasts the buns or flips the hamburgers or something, right? And by the way, you may not have been the person that flipped the hamburgers before, but now you're old enough you can flip the hamburgers. So you get a new role in the ritual. That alone says something different. Right? It is a way of reshaping your identities as you grow older. So as your roles in the rituals change, they have information about individual functioning and provide opportunities for reassessment and change in identities. So this is how we know that someone's different, is when they don't participate, or when the ritual has to change to accommodate them in some way. Okay, we're not going to take the vacation together this year. Why? Well, because so-and-so is different. And we can't coordinate it the same way. So we're going to find a different way of participating in the ritual, just not going to be the same as last year. So in some ways, rituals are routine, but rituals also have to have flexibility because families change. And that ability to change the ritual or any deviant behavior in participating in the ritual will have this adaptive function of telling the family, oh, something's wrong, something's different, or we need to change, or we need to correct, whatever that answer is. It gets shown up in the ritualized behaviors that happen on a regular basis. And this is why rituals become so important. They link us to the environment. They give us the sense that we are together, that we do work together, that we can have these things, and that there are people who are part of the unit, so it's coherent, and they tell us a lot about what's going on in family life. One of the dominant scales used to study family rituals assesses different aspects of ritual engagement across different contexts. And so this scale asks people to talk about, it's actually called a family ritual interview, and it has people talk about 7 different kinds of ritual events. Some of them are celebrations, some of them are routinized interactions, etc., right? And so the dinner time as a ritual, weekends, and later on we'll talk more about weekends as an important aspect of ritual, vacations, usually especially annual vacations, annual celebrations like birthdays, special celebrations, religious traditions, and cultural and ethnic traditions. So they ask people about their families and say, tell us about dinner time in your family. Tell us about the weekend as an event in your family, etc. Okay? And then for each of these, they have a whole set of things they ask about that fall under 2 dimensions. The first dimension is symbolic meanings of the ritual. And the symbolic meaningfulness of the ritual, it should be really meaningfulness, frequency and regularity of occurrence. If something happens all the time, or a lot, and it happens on a regular schedule, then it's more meaningful. if you don't tend to put it off, if you tend not to choose to delay it or to maybe not practice it that particular day or that particular week or year, then it's not as meaningful of an event as if you did it all the time and you did it a lot. Okay? Now, obviously, some of these you can't do a lot. Religious traditions happen once or twice a year, but you could say that if you think about all the religious traditions, you know, you have Christmas and Christian traditions, Christmas and Easter. Those are the two big ones. There might be a few others. Then you can't do them that often, but you can do them every single year, and you can practice them in a very similar way. A second aspect of symbolic meaningfulness is attendance requirement. So is this an event in which everybody in the family feels like, hey, we have to be there? There's a demand on us to be participants. And so the family meal would be a great example, but many of these other ones could be as well. And so I told you last time about the 4th of July in my family, how that was a regular event. And there was sort of a sense that everybody should come. And someone shouldn't be leaving early to go to a concert or something like that. You're supposed to be there, right? And so that's the idea of attendance requirement. A third is affective investment. Do people get a lot of emotional meaning out of attending that event? Do they get a lot of enjoyment? Would they miss the event if it wasn't held? Would they feel badly if they weren't able to attend? And so those are the kinds of aspects of affective involvement. Is there a lot of emotional communication going back and forth, people smiling at each other, or whatever, right? So you're sending emotional messages. Attachment of meanings. Do people give special significance to the event? So the 4th of July in my family, people gave a certain sense of significance to that event in terms of meaningfulness, that it was an important time for us. It was a time that we all got together, right? And sometimes we invite people over, and if we invited people over, that meant they were special people because they were invited to our special event. And if they weren't the right kind of people and we didn't all agree upon it, and someone invited them over, well, we would be courteous to them, but we would be really kind of upset a little bit that, no, why did you bring that person here, right? Because this is an event that has significance for us. And so whoever comes has to fit in with everybody. Otherwise, you're kind of playing down the significance of that event. And then deliberateness or planfulness is an event that people spend a lot of time preparing for, that they set up a schedule for it, they have events, elements planned for it. And so that would be this idea of deliberateness or planfulness of the event. The second major dimension is routine. So it's so much what is the significance or the meaningfulness of the event, but how routinized is it? Are there role specificity and prescription? Do people have specific roles that they play in the event? You know, so 4th of July, someone cleans the pool. It has to be cleaned at a particular time prior to that, and someone's designated as the person responsible for that. Someone buys the groceries or plans the meal out. Someone mans the barbecue. And every year, it seems to be the same people doing those events. As the family changes and as members change, they might move in somebody new, and someone might move on to a different role, but there's a negotiation around that. And so that's the idea of role specificity and prescription. Where do you sit at the table? What is your role at the table? What kinds of contributions do you make to the conversation? Who contributes when? And who runs the show? Those are all prescribed by, in this case, the dinner time event. Rigidity versus flexibility is an event that cannot change no matter what. Okay, so you can have a routinized event where you have role specificity and prescribed responsibilities. The question is, can those prescriptions change? And if they can't change, then it's a very rigid kind of routine. If there's some flexibility, if you can say, well, you know, someone else can do that job this time. Yeah, we understand it's your job, and it's been your job in the past, but, you know, let's let someone else get involved in it and be flexible in it. It could be that someone carves the turkey, and there's a big carving event on Thanksgiving. Who carves the turkey in your house?
I think my grandpa does.
Your grandpa?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In my family, I carve the turkey. This is my job. And so I remember the first Thanksgiving with my in-laws, and I carved the turkey. But my mother-in-law in my house told my brother-in-law, my sister's older brother, not older than her, but her older brother, that he was the one that was going to carve the turkey. Oh no.
No, not in my house.
So, you know, that's an idea of how much was I able to let that role go to him. You know, that would be the idea of flexibility. Or was it important that I continued to carve the turkey? I'm not going to answer that question, but that would be the sign of rigidity versus flexibility. Could someone else come in and do the other things? I mean, you've got things that always get done. There are specific tasks associated with the ritual, certain processes or events or interactions that happen. The question is it always going to be the same person? Are they always in the same order? If not, then you have more flexibility in it. And we'll see later that that's kind of an important idea about rituals, and especially when we get to adolescence. Because when children become adolescents, they put a lot of pressure on rituals to be more flexible. And then continuity across generations. And so this is the idea of routine. Do you do it the same way your parents did it, and your grandparents did it, and your great-grandparents did it? Excuse me, I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Sorry. Thank you. Continuity across generations. Do it the same way. And later on, we'll talk a little bit about family integrity, and that kind of plays into this a little bit. I always enjoyed the story once years ago when I was teaching elsewhere that someone was talking about their family traditions at Thanksgiving, or no, it was at Christmas. And they said, yeah, every Christmas in my family, we cut the end off the roast. And so they always have a roast, a pot roast or something like that. They cut the end off of it, and then they cook it. I go, why? You know? Well, no, we just always did it. And so that person then investigated why they went back to their grandparents and said, well, why do we cut the end off the turkey, the roast every Christmas? And the grandparents says, well, my mother did that. And I think it was because the pan was too small. But once it got done...
It was like it had to happen.
It had to happen, right? And so that's this idea of continuity across generations.
That's funny.
Why is that important? Why would continuity across generations be important?
Because it's something that connects all generations together. It's something that they all do together, even though they're at different points in their lives and they have different things going on.
It establishes that continuity, which is part of identity, right? So we talked last time a little bit about integrity, legacy. Mm-hmm. You know, this is the legacy. And so we do it in these ways, and when we do them and repeat them, we're saying that our life is tied to our previous generation's life. And something about the way they did things is going to set us in a direction of doing things in similar ways. And it's not just ritual, but it's then everything else that we as a family do. The kinds of goals that we choose to achieve, the ways in which we achieve goals, the ways in which we allocate roles in the family. To some degree, that's shaped by this connection that we feel with our family of origin. And so rituals maintain that, help maintain that. And one element of it is when these routines in our rituals have origins that come from previous generations. And so this is a widely used measure of family ritual. Some people use it as one complete scale. They talk about family ritual. And they, usually what they'll do is they'll say, it's a set of polar opposites of the forced choice. So they'll say, like, if it's dinner time, so tell me about dinner time, which of the following would be what best expresses your family's observance of dinner time. And it says, what the first one says, in some families, members regularly eat dinner together. In other families, they rarely eat dinner together. Choose one or the other. So it forces you to say, which kind of family am I? Am I a family that has frequency and regularity, or am I one that we do it, but we don't have it that much? And so it leaves individuals' perceptions of what is that regularity and frequency of occurrence. And then they'll do this for all of these different types, all 7 of these different settings. And so but then other studies will use maybe just symbolic meaning, or some will just use routine, or some will pull out like rigidity or flexibility. Okay? So it's used in various ways, but it's used a lot. It's one of the primary scales used for measuring family ritual. Okay, so that's enough of the meaning of ritual and its measurement. Now I want to talk a little bit about what is the role of ritual in family life. And our next segment, we're going to talk about family stress theory, and we'll see how ritual might play into how families deal with stressor events in their lives. And so I'm going to kind of come back to that later on. Right now, I'm just going to talk generally about normatively everyday life in families. What's the role of ritual? And the first place we're going to look at it is some research on what's the role of ritual in the transition to parenthood. Okay. Does a ritual change over the course of early childhood, infant versus preschool stage? So what happens in the transition to parenthood?
You have a baby?
Yeah, okay. Have you had a family class?
No.
No, okay. In a family, during the transition to when we call the transition to parenthood, it's when a young couple has their first child. So it's just the first child. That's all we're talking about. First child. What happens to the family in that transition? Do you think it's a really happy time of family life, or one that's not so great?
Probably one that's not so great.
Why?
Well, because you have this baby that cries all the time and requires a lot more of your attention that you've ever had to put on to something, and so it could add a lot more stress and a lot of other issues.
Yeah, and that's what the research generally shows. It shows that new parents get a lot of fulfillment and happiness out of their new baby. I mean, it cries and it poops and it wakes you up in the middle of the night, but there's a real sense of involvement with that child and a real sense of positive vibe that you get back from that attachment with that child. So children provide a lot of gratification in life, and having a child is often fulfilling for people's lives on a personal level. And so at that level, very happy time. But for family life, not so great, right? Because at that point in time, the family life is the marital couple, the husband and the wife. This child is screwing everything up, right? This child is disrupting everyday life. This child is putting new demands. Parents get exhausted. They don't have enough energy. They don't have time. The child is draining resources. It's expensive. And so what happens is that marital couple that before the baby was born had all this free time and could be spontaneous and lovey-dovey all the time. They had lots of energy for each other. They could go out and spend money and really have a good time. That's a lot of positives, a lot of rewards. And so the marriage gets evaluated in a very positive way. Child comes along, all that goes away. And people don't always alter their expectations in anticipation of that happening. They don't think anything's going to change, and then it does. And so you get what's called an expectation-behavior discrepancy. You get expectations for what's going to happen after the child is born in terms of the relationship between the parents and even things like what kinds of roles they're going to occupy. And we know that in the transition to parenthood, another thing that adds to the problem is the couple becomes very traditional. So before, they're not in traditional roles. Then afterwards, The wife winds up doing most of the housework and the cooking and the cleaning, etc. The husband tends to focus more on his job, because those are the traditional roles for men and women. And the baby has this sort of capacity to put a demand on the family to fulfill those roles, because it's obligation that society sets upon them because of a carryover from the past and the culture that we live in. And so men tend to see their idea of being a father as being a good earner. They invest a lot in their work. Takes a lot away from their marriage. Women, motherhood, they're focused on the home. They oftentimes withdraw from work. They focus a lot on the child. And they tend to not think so much about their husbands. And then neither of them wind up being terribly happy with where they're at. And so the husband doesn't feel like he's getting enough from the wife, and the wife doesn't feel like she's getting help from the husband. He used to do housework, he doesn't do it anymore. You know, this isn't good. I'm not happy. It's not fair. It's not. So you get questions of fairness and inequity in the relationship. And so the research shows, birth of that child, marital satisfaction goes down, especially for the wife. It goes way down. Okay? So the transition to parenthood, couples on average take a pretty big hit on their marriage and family evaluations. Could ritual buffer them against that? Is there something that practicing rituals could do that helps them better anticipate what's going to happen, and at least thereby better understand why their lives have changed? And if we understand why our lives have changed, if we anticipate that they're going to change and we kind of know how they're going to change, generally we're not going to be as harsh in evaluating the outcome. We'll be ready for it. And so that's the idea that several researchers have looked at in the role of ritual and the transition to parenthood. And one article actually looks at this. It says, does ritual, it asks it in two ways. It first starts out and says, okay, what is the ritual that couples develop during this transition? And does the ritual gradually build in so that maybe they take the hit at the transition to parenthood, but they can overcome that within a couple of years if they create ritual? The ritual would create a better sense of bonding and togetherness, a better understanding of what each other is confronting in their day-to-day lives, and that should help them. And so the argument in this particular study is that when you move out of the infant stage into the preschool stage, so after the first couple of years, families will naturally build in more ritual. And they'll build it in because a couple of reasons. Opportunities and potentials are greater later. The child can participate, right? So it's hard to have a ritual with somebody who just not has that capacity, right? But you know, you have a birthday. The first year, child probably doesn't understand birthdays very much. By the second year, the child's getting the hang of it. The third year, it's got to be elaborate. The fourth year builds on that, and so you wind up having a greater capacity for ritual that brings the whole family together, as opposed to separate roles. The husband's at work, the wife's taking care of the child. The husband comes and plays with the child occasionally, you know, or at night or something. But there isn't a real sense of oneness as a family because people are so specialized in their family tasks. And then shift from marriage focus to family focus. That it takes a while for a marital couple to get away from being a marital couple to the idea of being a family. And so when they go into the transition to parenthood, they generally are still thinking of themselves as a marital couple. And it takes a while for them to get the idea of, oh, we're different now. Right? Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. That would happen, right. So, and that's what does happen. So as we move from marriage focus to a family focus, then that opens up the opportunities to create more ritual that are family rituals, as opposed to the rituals that maybe we had before the child came that defined us as a couple, that now we can't participate in because the infant's here and is disrupting our opportunity to practice those rituals. And so that's the shift from marriage focus to family focus. There would be a marriage ritual before the birth of a child. Can you think of something a married couple might do that's ritualized?
Date night?
Date night, yeah. Great movie, by the way. Did you see that one?
I don't think so.
Oh, it's
That's
great.
with
That's a fun one.
Steve
Carell,
Carell.
yeah. Date night. And unfortunately, in that family, they didn't actually have the ritual. It was the first time. They're going to start date night because they're getting stale. And I guess they start it because they're feeling like they need to reestablish their marriage because the kids have interfered. And maybe they always anticipated a date night on a regular Saturday night. They always went out together before they were married and before their children came. And now they're trying to reach back and grab that ritual to help them reestablish the meaningfulness of their marriage relationship in the face of their family ties, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's the premise of the movie. Of course, it all goes whack in a great, funny way. But so this research says, well, in the infant stage, the marriage rituals get disrupted, which causes the dissatisfaction, and they're not yet replaced with marriage rituals. Family rituals, I'm sorry. And then as the child gets older, that greater capacity for the child to participate and a greater realization amongst the couple that they're not just a marriage anymore, they're now a family, and they want to reestablish that idea of being a family. Then they start developing these rituals. Now, do they do it consciously? Not necessarily, but maybe a little bit. But it just evolves. It's a product of group dynamic, the creation of rituals. So what are their findings? Their findings are that families with preschool child have more family-specific rituals than those with an infant. In particular, areas with regard to dinner time, how they spend their weekends, and the practice of annual celebrations. They do that a lot more after the child gets to be a little bit older. Before the child gets older, things like dinner time and weekend, those kinds of rituals, they've gone. They may have had them before, but now they're more difficult to practice because of the child being present. The child is a disruption. It's not regular in its behaviors, and so you can't anticipate what the child's going to do even at a dinner time, in a shared dinner time. Another finding is that families with preschool child have greater ritual meaning and ritual routine than those with an infant. So not just that they practice more rituals, especially around dinner time, weekends, and annual celebrations, but they practice them with greater meaningfulness and greater routine. And their occurrence is more frequent. They practice, for example, if it's dinner time, they do the same things over and over again on a regular basis. They tend to have a routine around the weekends that they tend to follow through on every weekend. In similar ways, the increased flexibility of the ritual. They tend not to see it as we have to do it the same way. There's much more openness to, okay, we can do it, but we'll be a bit flexible on the timing, perhaps, or a bit flexible in our role relationships in the ritual. Greater affective involvement. There's more emotional meaning attached to these events. Symbolic significance, greater, and then in the area of routine, greater role ascription and attendance requirements and expectations. So there's a greater sense that this is important. Yeah, the child's there and you have work to do, but this is important. And so we're going to make sure that we create a sense of meaning, create a sense of family identity. And if you're off working all the time and you're not here for dinner time, then that's not so good. And so work your schedule around it. You need to be here for the dinner time. You do something else, do your work at home later on or something like that. Okay? So these things start to build into the family during the transition. They also ask, does the ritual provide a buffer against the stresses that can come as a result of the transition? So do couples who have more ritual, have more meaningful ritual and more routinized ritual, do those couples have less of a problem during the transition? Okay. And the answer is, well, the reasoning is they provide meaningfulness and significance to new parenting roles. So if you develop some rituals in that early stage, then you're going to find out more about each other and what is necessary for dealing with the child. So maybe a ritual around decision making with regard to the child and work roles, etc. Maybe making sure that you have time apart from the infant, get a babysitter every particular point in time so that you can talk about what's going on in your life around a dinner uninterrupted by the child. That might be a very useful kind of ritual. And so what you get is greater meaningfulness, significance of the new parenting roles. The couple are going to wind up talking to each other more by participating in the ritual. And when they talk to each other, that provides the opportunity to find out more about what they're experiencing, what their demands are, and thereby and what their rationales are for their behaviors in the roles that they're occupying. And so this can create much greater appreciation for each other during the transition. And we know from research that appreciation is a big predictor in satisfaction. That if you feel appreciated for the roles that you perform in your family, if you feel that appreciation from your spouse, that's a big determinant of whether you're happy. It could be really unfair, it could be really unequal, but if you're appreciated, you're happy. Okay? Also, it can clarify new expectations, demands, the ability to, which can help with the ability to fulfill roles and making complementary role adjustments. So it's more than just appreciation, it's actually problem solving. It's all saying, you're overloaded in that area, maybe I can shift my responsibilities in a way that help me help you out and vice versa. Okay? Oh, you feel bad about dropping out of work. Well, why don't you start back half time and we can work some overtime and we'll be able to pay for someone to take care of the infant. Those things are possible because you're forcing yourself with the ritual to come together. You're not just working on everyday tasks. The ritual is providing, and we'll talk about this again later as well, something we call a liminal space. Okay? A liminal space is a place that's in between, a place that's on a threshold of something. And so you're living your life. You're responding to the demands, which are a lot in the transition to parenthood. If you have ritual, then what you're doing is you're suspending that for a moment. And that provides you a space in which you can then talk about what you're experiencing without the interference of having to experience it. And so that's what rituals really play an important role for, this sort of in-between space. We go back to life transition rituals, the traditional anthropological research. The one ritual we know a lot about is rites of passage. The rite of passage in a native culture would be, for boys in particular, this is a transition to manhood. Okay? What do? Go out there by yourself, in the wilderness, accomplish some adult task, and then come back and you're different. And so it's a threshold, it's a transition point. And it's a transition point in which that child actually is separated from the group and allowed to think about what the meaningfulness of that new role is, and to perform something that then, when he comes back, casts him in a different role automatically. So it helps with that transition. You think of the same thing for a family in the transition to parenthood. Having those rituals, providing that separate liminal space, that space in between, not only helps you redefine yourself as parents, you understand what it means to be a parent now, not just a marital couple, but you also understand what are the demands, and then you can negotiate and trade off responsibilities such that people aren't overtaxed and you find solutions to problems. Another is that it sets boundaries for the family of orientation involvement. One ritual that you could anticipate that new parents will establish is visiting in grandparents. And so how are we going to now engage our networks of families, supports that we're going to need, but also create a space or create a way of dictating to those other people what are the boundaries of their involvement. Right? And so we're going to go and we're going to have regular visits. And those regular visits are going to be controlled. They're going to be controlled in a way in which we can dictate to our extended family what it is that we see as important for our child. And so when we go to visit, we bring forward, here are the expectations. And through that, we socialize our extended family on terms of what their part is. Yeah, you can give them candy when they're here visiting. But you know you've got to support them, that you can't give them candy before they come home before dinner time because it's going to disrupt their dinner time. Those types of things. We're going to come visit you, but when you take the baby somewhere, it has to be in a seatbelt. I had a big fight with my mother-in-law. It wasn't really a fight, but it took a while to socialize her through these ritualized visits that no matter how much she protested, she was in the seatbelt. Okay? And so those family rides that we took together, in a sense, it provided that opportunity to convey that message. Because my mother-in-law lives out in the middle of nowhere. So seatbelts, they used to ride around in the backs of trucks. And so it took a little bit, but you caught on. Sorry, Nita. And the provide a basis for togetherness and cohesion in the face of increasing separateness between spouses. So this, again, it's not just negotiating the roles, but it's actually having a time when you're together. And it becomes almost a sacred time. It's like the date night tradition. No matter what, we're going to do this. No matter what, when the child goes to bed, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a drink. Every single night. I watched this show, House of Cards. Mm-hmm. You see that? They have kind of a tradition of having a cigarette by the window every night they come home. Brings them together. Creates a bond there. By practicing over and over and over again, it's saying, you are part of my life. My regular life pattern always includes you. No matter how hectic it gets during the day, it always includes you. And so it creates that sense of togetherness. So does the ritual provide this buffer? The findings, the differences between families with an infant versus those with preschool children were smaller when the ritual meaning was high. So this is what's called an interaction effect. So if you look at people who have high ritual meaningfulness, they score higher on the meaningfulness score, and then you compare the ones with preschool children to the ones with infants. The one with preschool children are more satisfied than the ones with infants, but the difference is a lot smaller than when you look at the families where there was low meaningful ritual. There, the preschool are much bigger than the infants in terms of their satisfaction, much higher. Okay, another aspect of family rituals, sometimes family rituals, apart from the degree of meaningfulness or the degree of routine, we can think of the ways in which rituals around the transition to parenthood might actually play a more specific role in helping with the transition. And so another study that looks at the role of ritual in transition was conducted by a person who was a social worker, especially amongst Hispanic Americans. And what he discovered was that there was a ritual within the Hispanic culture that he was finding in his research in Minnesota that Hispanic Americans were practicing almost uniformly. He had like 35 different families, and all but one of them practiced this ritual, this cultural ritual, which was specifically tied to the transition to parenthood. So this isn't ritual in the sense of couples working out, like, we'll have a date night or something along those lines, which are just routinizations of the day-to-day interactions. This is actually the use of a ritual that is in their culture. And so Hispanic culture has this ritual that when people practice it, that it might, we don't look at it and see if does it make sense in terms of helping these couples in the transition to parenthood. And that's what he looks at, because he finds, they're all doing it. Why are they doing it? Even in a modern Western society, they're not in Mexico anymore. They're here in the United States. Their lives are like every other U.S. person from the same social economic group. And other people don't have this ritual. The Hispanics do. And they still find it useful. So it's more than just perhaps more than just a following tradition. It's following tradition with a purpose almost. That there's some realization that this must be helpful. That modern society can't interrupt it, or hasn't interrupted it yet. Although certainly in other areas it probably has. I don't think probably Hispanics in New York practice it as much. In New York City, perhaps, as in Minnesota. So the ritual is called La Quarantena, or La Quarantena, I think Quarantena. Basically, it means the quarantine period. And it's a 40-day postpartum ritual. So for 40 days after the baby's born, the couples practice, and their whole families practice this ritual. And it has elements that when you look at it, make a lot of sense. You'd say, well, that would be really helpful for a new couple with their first child. And so what were some of those things? Well, first of all, there are certain behavioral prescriptions, things you can't do for this 40 days. A lot of them are around the mother. So the mother, well, this couple has to abstain from sex, which is a great idea. This is a really period of time of the infant's susceptibility to illnesses and things. You don't want to get pregnant again. That's really going to interfere with the health and well-being of this infant in those early critical days. Second prescription, the wife can't eat certain kinds of foods. So she can't eat heavy, cool, spicy, bloating, or agitating foods. So heavy foods, things with sour cream in them.
So does vegetables?
Fried foods, chimichangas you can't eat. Cool foods are things like cucumbers are banished. Spicy foods, obviously. Bloating foods, lots of carbohydrates and lots of milks and creams. And then agitating foods would be things like coffee or anything with caffeination in it. And then, more importantly, and these things are actually good, especially if you're breastfeeding a child and you're trying to lose weight from the birth. Both healthy things to do. And so these things are directing that mother to put herself in a condition that will benefit the child through nutrition, as well as benefit herself in terms of physical appearance, and thereby benefit the marriage through maintaining attractiveness in the relationship. Also, the elimination of household tasks, especially those involving lifting. So before the child is born, the wife is doing about 100% of household tasks. For the 40 days of La Quarantena, she's doing about 33% of household tasks. And then after the Quarantena, she's back up to 91%. So it's a respite of 40 days. It also includes behavioral prescriptions, demands of things that you have to do. So increase in milder, non-fattening foods, so you have to eat more of these, wearing of looser clothing, focus on child tasks with instruction from mother or mother-in-law. So this ritual brings the mother or the mother-in-law into the family on a regular basis for this 40 days, constantly giving lessons. And the mother is sitting there, and her role is to accept those lessons and to learn how to do it. And then preparation of the father for parenting tasks by the wife. So the other thing that, as she learns these things, she gets the father to start learning how to hold the baby. And there's a lot of ritualized interactions around him learning how to do this, and he's supposed to take on that task. And everybody around them in their family and in their extended family all are playing out their parts in encouraging him to have this connection with the infant. He has to learn how to change a diaper. He has to learn how to give a child a bottle for bottle feeding. And so he becomes prepared, the wife prepares him, and everyone around is encouraging him to be part of that. Could be a joking kind of episode. in which he's laughed at for holding the baby wrong or something along those lines, with the encouragement, no, you got to do it right. And the mother, her part is to teach him how to do it. And he has to accept what she tells him, which in a patriarchal culture is counter to the everyday roles. And so this is a suspension of reality, this 40 days. And that allows him to become a potential supporter. Not only is he going to understand what his wife's going through in caring for the infant, because he had done some of it himself, but if she has a need for someone to step in, it creates that flexibility that he's able to do those things. And then father responsible for household tasks. Again, another suspension of reality. In a patriarchal culture, men don't do housework. But for these 40 days, men do housework. Especially the heavier stuff is more in line with a male role. But they do a lot of housework, a lot of cleaning, food preparation, etc. They'll be involved in those kinds of activities. So again, it's building in greater flexibility in family life for later. So you would have to think that these kinds of, this aspect of this ritual is beneficial for family life down the road. Some of the outcomes of this then, preparation of the mother, health of the mother and child, greater child spacing because of the absence of some sexual relations, flexibility in role organization, clarification of new role responsibilities and changes in family dynamics, husband appreciation of the wife, he knows what she's up to, defined place for extended kin, the kin know their parts and their roles, and liminal period of equality, openness, self-sacrifice, leading to stronger bonds. So there's a sense that the husband is helping out the wife, who clearly is the one responsible for the infant. And so his involvement and his participation in the ritual and his willingness to let the wife tell him what's what with regard to the caring of the child establishes an equality there and a closeness and perhaps a greater opportunity for disclosures with each other that wouldn't normally have happened before the baby was born or if the baby hadn't been born. And so it's bringing that husband in and creating that part of the family, creating that, building that family identity in that regard. Another area of ritual plays a big role in ordinary everyday life of families is during the transition into adolescence. And so probably the two biggest transitions in marriage life, in family life, are that transition to parenthood, becoming a parent for the first time, and then there's some other events along the way when the child goes to school for the first time. The next really big one is when that child turns into an adolescent. There's a lot going on in the adolescent's life, personal life, their physiology, their psychology, so their emotions are raging, they're becoming a sexual being for the first time, and they have to deal with that. And they're starting to get this self-awareness of who they are, and questioning who that person is and what their potential could be. So there's all that going on inside the individual, and then outside that individual is now part of a high school system in which you don't have the same teachers all day long, and you have to change from one classroom to another in a big, large school as opposed to a small school where everybody knew you. Now you're anonymous. There's lots that can happen in between, going from one point to another. You have to kind of organize your life and know how to be someplace at a certain time. You're going to have friends who are going to have more independence, who are going to be asking you to participate in things away from your family. So there's this big need for autonomy that happens in adolescence, and that is likely to be very disruptive of family life. And so the challenge of adolescence for families is in establishing greater autonomy and separation while maintaining a place in a cohesive family group that can provide support. So on the one hand, the adolescent needs to have a safe, needs this autonomy and separateness to manage everything that's going on in its life, but it also needs to have a safe haven during a time of personal upheaval due to changing identity and external social context. So that child's going out there for the first time in this world. That's crazy. They don't understand. They don't understand what's inside of them. They don't understand what the rules are outside of them. They're trying to make sense of it all. And they probably don't have established relationships out there yet. They're meeting a bunch of new kids, not necessarily the kids they went to school with before they went into high school. And so the family can be a very important source of support that they're going to really need and desire. And in fact, they do. They do want that. And they need to have sources of stable reflected appraisal and outlets of risk-free self-disclosure in order to work out their identity issues. So not just having a place of support, but it's also having a place where you can talk things out. People you can talk to, that you can deal with these identity issues. Whose advice do you take? Well, if you have parents there and family members, that's going to be a source that you can trust, a source that's not likely to put you at risk if you disclose something to them. And so in high school, you're always protecting yourself because whatever comes out could be used against you. And so with family members, hopefully that's not the case, right? And so we actually know that adolescents want to have these close family ties. They really desire them. So family rituals during this time need to have both commitment and flexibility. So there has to be commitment. It has to have an ongoing enactment and participation. There has to be something there that draws that child to it and demands its participation in some way so that that continues to create a meaning, a symbolic sense that, hey, I have this. It's there for me. At the same time, it has to have flexibility. It has to be a kind of ritual enactment that says, okay, we make exceptions, or the way that you were part of this ritual before is now different because you're a different person. And so the ways in which the ritual is still there, there's still that demand for people to participate, it's this ongoing occurrence, but the rules are loosened up as far as the adolescent is concerned. And the role of the adolescent in the ritual is also oftentimes changed. And so one way that the role is changed in particular is involvement of the adolescent in planning, in the planning of the event. So adolescents can be part of, it could be dinner time, getting the child interested in cooking. So what would you like to have? Or where would you like to go this weekend? Getting the child's input, which says, we're going to accommodate you on one hand, and we now see you as someone different. We now see you as more of an adult member of the family, someone who has a different role. And then modifications of timing in the process to accommodate adolescents' external pressures and demands. So we'll just move the event, or we understand that you have football camp, and so we'll do our family vacation a different week. We've always done it this week before, but we're going to start a new element of the tradition, okay? If families are rigid, it's not good for the adolescent. It just creates more demand in a world that's already demanding. And so the family has to be able to accommodate that child and bring it in while still maintaining a sense of continuity and family togetherness that the adolescent wants, but needs the flexibility to have that autonomy and separateness. Research on the significance of family rituals in adolescence. There's been quite a bit of research on this, and a lot of the studies show that attending family meals is very important. That adolescents who attend family meals on a regular basis are less likely to get involved in substance use, are less depressed, and have less suicidal ideation thoughts. More broadly, research that uses the family ritual scales, both in areas of meaningfulness and routine, shows that adolescents who come from families that have a higher score on family ritual have greater self-esteem, see themselves as more lovable, and have higher levels of identity integration. They're better, in other words, they're better able to see themselves as a person who's part of a family and is part of a peer network and is part of a school. They're able to integrate those identities much more successfully, such that they're not being one kind of person in one setting and a totally different person in the other. They're able, probably because these rituals encourage those disclosures, family members learn more about what that adolescent is going through outside the home as well as internally what they're dealing with. And that facilitates communication, which then creates an understanding and helps the child then make that integration to be able to say, oh, you understand what I'm going through, and then I get your advice, and then that changes what I choose to do outside the family such that it winds up being integrated with what I am inside the family. High scores on the ritual scales are correlated with less use of mental health services. So families with higher ritual scales, their children are less likely to wind up being identified as needing mental health services. And less attachment anxiety in later adult romantic relationships, even controlling for parental attachment. So high ritual scores in adolescence means that these children wind up, when they become young adults and they get into relationships of their own, they have less attachment anxiety, less concerned about issues of closeness and separation than are adolescents who grew up in homes where there is less ritual development. And that's even controlling for parental attachment, which you would expect that a family with high ritual would have high levels of parent-child attachment or low attachment anxiety with parents because they're engaged, and that most of the research on attachment shows that parental attachment tends to generalize to later romantic attachments. But this is an effect that's even beyond that. So the ritual is adding something extra in terms of later attachment development. One of the big intervening processes, so why does family ritual development facilitate adolescent development? And I gave you some ideas on a more specific level. One study tried to identify a key element of family systems characteristic that is tied to family ritual that is having the effect. And this study looked at cohesion. And what it found was that families with high levels of ritual, as reported by the parents, those parents, because they, as a result of having high levels of ritual, report higher levels of perceived cohesion in their family, and vice versa. And so this was a study that looked at families over time. And so time one parental perceptions or reports of ritual predicts time two family perceptions of cohesion. And as well, time one cohesion, parents' perception predicts time two levels of family ritual. So a family that has a lot of cohesiveness will tend to develop more ritual, and a family that has more ritual will enhance its cohesiveness. So it's a bidirectional effect. They then found, in further analyzing their results, that it's actually quite an interesting process in terms of how it results in adolescent well-being. That family ritual by itself, when put in an equation with cohesion, isn't responsible for the adolescent well-being. It's the cohesion that creates the adolescent well-being. And so this research is focusing on how, in spite of all the theoretical arguments for why family, and probably cohesion is capturing some of those other elements, like how much you talk to your parents about your life and those types of things. Those get tied into the idea of cohesion as well. And so this study is saying that it's not the ritual and the practice of the ritual that creates the well-being. It's the fact that the ritual promotes cohesiveness in the family. And so the child feels as though there is a place. And so more specifically, they found that family ritual at time one predicts parents' perceived cohesiveness at time one. So how much ritual was going on predicts the parents' perception that their family is a cohesive unit. That perception of the parents at time one then leads at time two to the adolescent feeling like their family is a cohesive unit. And that then predicts the adolescent's well-being at time two. So if we analyze this dynamic, and they studied all the different possible pathways that you could go from ritual to well-being, and this is the one that proved to be significant. What it's saying is, it's not that ritual predicts perceived adolescent cohesion by itself. What happens is the ritual enhances the parents' perceptions of cohesion at time one. And because the parents perceive the cohesion at time one, they then act towards their adolescents in ways that cause the adolescent to feel part of the family. If they don't have ritual, the parents don't feel as much cohesion. And if the parents don't feel as much cohesion, they're more likely to disengage when that adolescent is pushing for autonomy. And because they disengage, the adolescent doesn't feel like they're part of a cohesive family unit. And then the adolescent is left alone, and that being left alone without support results in reduced well-being. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. So it's a very interesting study in this regard. So ritual creates the feeling of cohesion by the parents, and that causes the parents to engage with the child, even at a time when the child is wanting separation. And that engagement causes the child to feel that there is a family there for them. And that then leads to them feeling better about themselves and experiencing positive outcomes. All right, the next area in which ritual has been studied is its role in divorce. And this particular study is quite interesting because it really shows how ritual creates a sense of family in spite of what traditionally we would call a broken family, and how it helps establish boundaries of families, etc. And so this one study looks at how do non-resident parents maintain connection to their children and a sense of family identity through the ritual of the weekend. The weekend, a very important ritual for non-residential parents. Because what happens with non-residential parents? When do they get to see their children?
The weekend.
On the weekend. Probably every other weekend they get the child. They probably get half of the holidays, school holidays. Usually that's how things are arranged. And the custodial parent is there with the child all the time and every other weekend. And by those day-to-day interactions, that should foster a sense of family identity, tying the child to the custodial parent. So when this child goes to visit the non-residential parent, the non-custodial parent, what happens then? How is that non-residential parent ever going to sustain any kind of idea of being part of the child's family? Or having the child part of his family. And so this research was looking at how these non-residential parents construct the weekend as a very intensive and purposeful ritual. And they don't just let it happen. It has very specific planning elements to it and elements of emotional involvements that, when you look at them, show how it's being used to create a sense of family, even though there isn't that interdependency that normally creates the idea of family. I mean, we know what family we belong to because we're always with them. We're always interacting with them. We coordinate our lives with them. It's a reality of our existence on a day-to-day basis. It's not for these non-residential parents. So they're going to use the ritual of the weekend to kind of create that idea and that connection with their child. So a weekend as a ritualized event, again, it's a time away from the demands of everyday life, or a liminal place reserved for family in modern society for the purposes of finding authentic relationships. So the argument is that, look, the weekend exists out there already as a ritual that lots of families participate in, even families without divorce. This is what we do on the weekend. This is our weekends. It may be varied from weekend to weekend, but there are certain elements of it that usually preclude the interference of work. That the weekend is not the time when you engage in work. It's a time for relaxation, it's a time for engagement with other family members, etc. As I gave you the example of my own life, my weekend is sacred because I don't see my wife during the week. And so this is the time for us. Work can't interfere. Sometimes it has to, but it's not supposed to. And so there's a demand to do other things before the weekend hits so that they don't interfere, right? And there's a planning. I know what's going to happen on that weekend. I know every Friday we're going to go down to the wine store and we're going to taste wine, and we're probably going to go sit in the back porch or something like that, right? It's something that we do. If it's a Sunday night or a Saturday night, there's a television show that we're going to watch all the time. Right? So there's that element of the weekend that in some families can become more planned and purposeful because there's a greater need for it. Most of us, when we live day-to-day lives with our whole family there present, maybe it doesn't have that much significance, but it's still, during those day-to-day lives, we're not having enough time with each other. Work is interfering, stresses and strains are interfering. And so we usually find that the weekend is a time that we're going to many times plan out an activity that's a family-related activity. And so this is this liminal space. This is this place in between. We suspend the rest of the world. It's one of the reasons that work-family kinds of studies are really important in focusing on the idea of forced overtime. So one of the most difficult things that families or employees of the Boeing company have complained about in the past is that Boeing in the past, I'm not sure if they still do, has had forced overtime for their employees. Every other weekend they have to work. And that was a real sore point in some negotiations some while back. But no, this is the space that's special for family. It's not supposed to be work. So the significance of the weekend for non-residential parents is it's a limited time to be with their children that requires special meaning and significance in order to create this sense of family identity. So these weekends are really important. You don't miss a weekend. If you miss a weekend, the significance for the idea that you're part of that child's family is enormous. Especially because the weekend has become this ritual time. And so if you don't participate, what you're saying is family isn't important. The family tie isn't important. And so it's non-residential parents really are vigorous in their defense of their time on these weekends. They tell other people, they tell work, I can't be there. They tell other people, look, don't even ask. The kids are here this weekend. It's my time with them. And they clear their schedules in ways to make it a special event. They're ritualizing it. So, this study found 3 stages in the ritual amongst these non-residential parents that they interviewed. The first was an anticipation stage. That these parents were saying that they really did anticipate a time of difference with their children. A time that was not ordinary. That was extra special, that had special significance. So the idea is we just don't do everyday things. If we do everyday things, then our time together is no different than any time with the other parent. We need to make it special. We need to have a time when we give special significance to being together. Because that tells us that we are together. Tells us that we are a unit, that we are a family. And so they would do this by completing work assignments and chores prior to the event. And a lot of them said, yeah, I do these kinds of things to make sure that I don't have to worry about doing major household chores. And I make sure that my work is finished before the weekend comes. In other words, they shape their everyday life in a way that allows them to then participate in the ritual. So this is the anticipation element. Structuring the event to avoid interruptions of the mundane of everyday life. So when they're thinking about what's going to happen on this weekend, they're not going to make dinner. They're going to order out. They're going to get a pizza. They're not going to spend time doing things that are ordinary events, because that just takes away from the limited time that they have for special events. Or they might say, well, we're going to go over to the grandparents' house, their own parents' house for dinner, and make that part of the weekend, every other weekend ritual. Dinner with relatives. And so that's a third element in what this anticipation. They structure the event to expand the boundaries of the family to include extended relationships. So if you always go and visit your parents every time those kids are there, or you go and visit another family member or have a family member over from your side of the family, then what you're doing is you're creating that connection of the child, not just to you, but to what will be more clearly an idea of a family. It's your family of orientation, but it's still a family. And so the child doesn't feel necessarily, it's not like a pressure to be connected to one individual, but the child is saying, oh, I'm part of a family system that's over here. I'm also part of this family system on my mother's side, but on my father's side, there's a family system there, and they accept me and absorb me. And so that creates that feeling of being part of the family. Not just a weekend with dad. It's a weekend with dad's family. And so that is an important element in these fathers. They're mostly fathers in this case. There are a few women, but these non-residential parents. And planning and organizing the event to be different and therefore more meaningful and memorable. So these parents are always thinking of something new to do, something exciting, some place to go, some special activity that they want to have that time with their child to, again, make it more than the ordinary. And thereby it'll raise the symbolic significance of it in terms of defining the child as part of the non-residential parent's family. And engaging the child in helping with planning and organization. Sorry, this is going here yet. So they engage in helping and planning the organization. So a lot of the fathers or non-residential parents, they would plan something out, and then when their child came that first few minutes, they'd say, oh, I had some ideas. Here's some things that we could do this. What do you want to do? In other words, make the child feel like they're a decision maker, that they're part of the unit. And that's fostering that family identity in that sense. The second stage is experiencing the uniqueness of the event. And so this often involves engaging in play and closeness activities, providing complete attention and maximization of child's rewards. And so these fathers or these non-residential parents, when they're engaged with their children, they are intensely engaged during this experience. It's not just that they planned it all out, they actually engage themselves in it. They imbibe themselves in their child's lives. They incorporate their children in everything they do. Oftentimes, from the residential custodial parent's point of view, to the detriment of the child. Child can stay up late at night, watch TV. Child doesn't have to eat any kinds of special foods. They eat fun stuff. Because again, maximizing that positiveness of the experience, creating rewards, creating reasons for the child to be involved. You say, well, that's kind of crass, but actually, not really. If you only have a certain amount of time, the level of rewards that the child experiences will draw that child to orient towards that parent. Now, they did find in this group parents who said, well, I also, you could also think that you could create a ritual around some element of regulation of life. That in our family here, there are rules. It doesn't have to be all freedom. But most of these fathers didn't, or most of these non-residential fathers didn't mention that. But that could be part of the ritual too. But it would have to be something special. There'd have some specialness to it to enhance the significance of the event. And that's, by the way, is a problem with custodial parents. It's these children coming back and there's like no regulation, no rules. They're eating all kinds of stuff that they're not allowed to eat at home. That can be a source of conflict because they have to deal with the child on an everyday basis and they can't do that. But the reality is for the non-residential parent is they don't get any other opportunities. And so they're motivated to sustain the identity and less so about necessarily facilitating the life of the custodial parent. And so that can be a big source of conflict in a lot of these couples it was. And then saying goodbye was the third stage. So then, You anticipate, you have the experience, and then you have to end it. And so how do you bring it all to a closure? And one of the problems with bringing it all to a closure is to bring it to a conclusion in a way in which the child doesn't feel as though allegiance to the non-residential parent or non-custodial parent means disloyalty to the custodial parent. And so lots of these parents talked about how they, in the saying goodbye, they work really hard to make sure that it's done in a way, the handover of the child is done in a way that minimizes contact between the non-custodial parent and the custodial parent. They can keep it as separate as possible. They want to say goodbye to the child and say, okay, I'm releasing you back, but you're still part of my family, and you can be part of that family too, and I'm just going to make it easy on you by having a separate space. So they find neutral zones for returning the child without involving conflict with the ex-spouse. Public places, lobbies of apartment houses that the custodial parent lives in, especially as they get a little older. They might use cell phones. Give me a call when you're downstairs, and then open the door and the child goes in. Using grandparents, taking the child over to the grandparents' house or the custodial parent's house, and dropping it off that way. There are some programs that have been instituted in the United States, for example, that help facilitate this saying goodbye, or even for saying hello, for parents who are restricted in their interactions with their children, in which a location like a church or something along these lines would provide people, a place and people present for the parent to visit with their child. And so that would be an example of that. And then expressions of sadness and sorrow to signify the time together. So it has to end on a sad note. It has to end on the idea that, I'm sorry to see you go. I don't want you to go. I wish you didn't have to go. And if we both feel sad about it, then it says that it was a fun event. It was a good event. We have a connection. And we don't like to be separated. You can add in there, we'll see each other again. But there's that element of sadness in all of these in terms of that separation. So this article is looking at how the ritual of the weekend takes on special significance in certain kinds of family situations, in this case of the divorce, or in the case of families where there's separation for periods of time during the week, then the weekend becomes that special time, or where parents have jobs which are really demanding during the week, and so they really don't have time and emotional energy to deal with family, and that weekend becomes a very precious time. And so this would be characterized a lot of high-end executive kinds of positions. Their family lives revolve around weekends. That's the time to do these things. Families that have separations, like I said, I have my own personal examples, separation in my current family, separation when my father was when I was living in my home that I grew up in, my father being away during the week. Those weekend times had that very special characteristic to them. Finally, ritual plays a role in families of alcoholics. Alcoholism can disrupt family rituals quite a bit, as you can imagine, right? Rituals are about regulation. Rituals are about routine. What's the thing that's a defining characteristic of people who are alcoholics? They don't usually live up to expectations. They often disrupt routine. They're not predictable. And so when we look at alcoholic families, one of the biggest problems is that their day-to-day lives are just disrupted by the alcoholism, by a failure to fulfill responsibilities, by behaviors that disrupt other people's abilities to fulfill their responsibilities. And so they can be very disruptive. And so this research looks at the ways in which alcohol can disrupt family rituals, and it makes a distinction in two areas. One, what they call the subsumptive versus distinctive family rituals. A subsumptive family ritual is one in which the alcohol disrupts it. So to what extent do your day-to-day family rituals or year-to-year family rituals, do they wind up getting disrupted by an alcoholic member? So you're going to have this ritual and everything you got planned out falls apart because of the alcoholism. It could be dinner time. Dad doesn't show up because he's out at the bar. It could be rituals around going to school. It could be rituals around holidays. It's Christmas and, Uncle Bob shows up and he's drunk and he starts talking in ways that make people upset, and all of a sudden the meaningfulness of the ritual goes away. So that would be a subsumptive kind of ritual, as opposed to a distinctive family ritual in which the family very clearly prevents the alcoholic member from participating or circumscribes their role in such a way that they can't disrupt it. Oftentimes practicing it separately. Go to the bar. Leave us. We'll practice the ritual here. Okay? Go up to your room. Go down in the basement. Do whatever you want. Just stay out of our hair. Because if you're not going to be able to participate, then we don't want you here. So you create this sort of boundary around the alcoholic member to prevent them from disrupting the family ritual, and thereby preserve the idea of familyness, of family identity, as not deviant, as workable, as functional, as opposed to the deviant member, the alcoholic member, who's not functional. And so that's the substantive distinctive family rituals. And level of deliberateness, planning and follow through. How deliberate does the family carry through on their rituals in spite of having an alcoholic member? Findings in this were that subsumptive family rituals in families of alcoholics increase the likelihood of intergenerational transmission of alcoholism. So if the family had family rituals that were being disrupted by the alcoholic parent, it was more likely that the children in that family would develop alcoholism. If they were able to be distinctive in their family rituals, they were able to prevent that intergenerational transmission of the alcoholism. Also, high deliberateness in establishing one's own family of procreation rituals, as opposed to the alcoholic family of origin heritage, reduces the likelihood of intergenerational transmission of alcoholism. So if you grew up in a family with an alcoholic, and when you grow up and you get married to somebody, presumably someone who's not from an alcoholic family, if that person is able to, with you, develop rituals that are distinct from the kind of rituals that were being disrupted by the alcoholism of your parent, and you're able to follow through on that as a couple and say, no, we're not your family that you grew up, we're our own family, and we're going to be distinctive from your family. We'll have elements, yes, but we also are separate, and we're going to follow through on our plannings. We're not going to allow that other person to disrupt what we have. In those families, there's less likelihood of intergenerational transmission of alcoholism as well. So if you grew up in an alcoholic family and you had a subsumptive ritual pattern, and then you get married, if in your marriage, in your new family of procreation, you wind up developing carefully planned and followed through rituals, it makes it less likely that you will inherit your parents' alcoholism. So it's both the family of origin, whether or not it was subsumptive or not. If it was subsumptive, then you're more likely to develop alcoholism. But you can override that if in your family of procreation, you wind up developing carefully planned and followed through rituals. And so we see ritual really playing an important role in families with alcoholics. It's one way that those families can actually make sense of themselves and create an identity that is a functional identity, not disrupted by the alcoholism. And that's what we find in a lot of the research on how families of alcoholics cope and how they manage by using the ritual to keep that part separate they then plan as a unit without that person there. Not just in carrying out the ritual, but then it carries through on everything else that they do in their day-to-day lives as a family. And then finally, high deliberateness of family rituals in alcoholic families reduces negative emotional and behavioral impacts on children. So if you have a more deliberate family ritual and there's an alcoholic present, not only is it less likely that there'll be an intergenerational transmission of the alcoholism, but the children will show less negative emotional and behavioral impacts. They'll be better off. So we see ritual as a protective function in these kinds of situations. Last time we were continuing our discussion of family culture. We talked about an overview of what the family identity and how families create identities, and how individual identities are developed within the context of the family. And that's all part of culture, ideas of symbolic meanings that exist in families. Then we talked about ritual as a particular element of the culture that transfers those meanings or puts them out in actual practice. And now I want to talk about a final element of family culture that also plugs into family identity formation, and that's the idea of family memories and narratives. So we can think of families as having shared memories that create family identity. So if I were to ask you about your family, you would have memories of your family life, right? Those memories weren't formed just by you. They were mostly formed over time with other family members. And so you've come to an agreement about this is what family life was like. And you might actually have a slightly different idea, but if I were to ask you what your family is like, and most likely you would come up with what was the shared idea. And for the most part, you're going to have a lot of that sharing of those memories, even if you have some specific individual elements that you always keep to yourself. So this idea of shared memories is important because it tells us that we're a family. Right? And they are the pieces that sort of define us. It's when we think back about what our family life was like, those memories, the ways we've constructed them, says something about our commonhood and our uniqueness from other groups. So those participants create family identity through the development of these memories. So these shared memories are shared and agreed upon symbolic representations of experience that demonstrate the commonality of those experiences and the unique ways that family members see their past, the way that they share a common or shared worldview. So when you identify with the group, that's part of creating that identity of that group. Family narratives are the ways that we create family memories, shared memories. And so families tell stories about themselves, about their past. Okay? And so shared narratives are stories that are shaped, retold, and renegotiated over time. So do you tell stories in your family? Do you have any great stories from your family life? You sit around the table on a holiday, or you go back to visit home and you talk about, geez, remember that time? And you start telling a story. Do you do any of that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Does the story always stay the same?
For the main concepts do, the people that are in it and what happened, but each time it gets more and more exemplified,
or elaborated in different ways.
Certain parts of the stories will be oh no, it was more terrible than that, or oh no, it was 105, it wasn't 80 degrees out.
Right. Okay, good. Yeah, I had my wife and I adopted grandparents when we lived in Minnesota in graduate school, and Ed and Esther, and they were 85 and 90 years old. And we'd always remember sitting out on their back porch, and they would tell us stories about their family life. And they would always be contextualized by the weather in winter in Minnesota. And Ed would say, remember that terrible snowstorm in 1935 in Essex. No, it was 1937. I remember, you know, and they debate back and forth exactly when it was, and then in the process, all these other things would come in about their family history. Yeah, that was when we had Julie, and she was only 3, or, you know, that's how they remember it, because you can't remember a Minnesota winter one from the other. They're all awful, right? So this is the idea that we create these narratives, we tell the stories have some value in the telling in terms of shaping family identities. But the story itself, in terms of what is included, says something about the state of the family in the past, as well as the state of the family today. So family identity is shaped by choices about what elements of the previous experience are incorporated into it. What kinds of things do you highlight when you tell that story? Okay? What kind of motivations do you attribute to the participants in the story? Why did people do what they did? What things that they did do you focus on? What kinds of things did you leave out? Those are all ways of shaping an idea about who we are as a family that is in the interest of the storyteller to some degree. I'm going to leave out the things that aren't so nice about me, right? Or convey the interests of the family as a group, to show the idea that we worked. Usually we tell stories about things that show us working as a group. Yeah, remember that time and everything was falling apart, and you know, this is how it all came together. It was a great ending. Oftentimes good stories, and the stories we tell, tend to have those endings. And as you said, you know, sometimes we say, well, it wasn't all that great, and you start thinking about the story in different angles, but then you come back to usually a resolution that's usually in a positive sense. Most functional families do, right? And so previous experiences are incorporated, how they are evaluated, and by the very process of negotiating the narrative. Every time you sit around the table and tell a story about your family with your other family members, what are you doing? You are essentially doing family. Okay? And in some ways, that's the idea of identity that's been used with respect to gender. So people talk about, what is your gender identity? And some symbolic interactionists have come back and said, wait, you don't have a gender identity. You create a gender identity every time you act, in every moment. You do gender, you aren't a gender, you do gender. And you choose what gender is by your actions. In a sense, when we tell stories about our family life with our other family members, we are doing family. We are working together on a task, constructing a shared memory. And so narratives can be pretty important for understanding families, and the shared memories and the narratives taken together can provide a foundation, as we'll talk about later when we talk about stress, for families when they confront issues in their day-to-day lives. They oftentimes can rely upon these shared memories, and they can tell stories that bring them together when other things would have been pushing them apart. And so they can play an important role in that respect. All right, there are 2 types of shared memories that families construct. One is what can be called event memories. And these are discrete events of varying time lengths that have specific significance for family members. And oftentimes we'll have pictures to help us recall, but other times we don't even need the pictures. Okay? And so we have this idea, most couples can remember their marriage, their wedding. I should put wedding there, not marriage. Their wedding. That's a particularly important memory, right? We actually create a memory book. Look how happy we were, right? Look how much we saw in each other. Look how much joy was there. Look at all those shared friends that we had. And we can talk about that event in the past. Okay? And it signifies something about us as a couple at that time. The honeymoon, again, we can look at that event to kind of say, yeah, look where we were able to go. We had a lot of fun. We were a fun-loving couple. Why don't we do that again? Or births. Remembering that first child, or the second child, or the third child. and thinking back about what was that event like? What was it like that period of time when that baby was first born? What was our life like? What were the challenges that we had? What were the positives that we had? What were the kinds of relationships we had with other people? Those were the things that defined us as a family group. And to some degree, they're still in our family today. We still have those connections to them. And so that gives us that continuity as well. Other event memories, illnesses. I always remember the event of my daughter getting spinal meningitis. It was horrifying. It wasn't one small time event. It was about a 10-day event. 10 days in the hospital, switching off with my wife, back and forth. And that memory and the story that goes along with it plays a large role in how my daughter understands her part in our lives. You know, all the fear and anxiety and all of the ways in which we got through it and the things we did to make it work said something about our relationship to her now. This helps her understand our views of her, our connections with her. It also helps us think about how, hey, we got through that. We could get through almost anything. You know? So that idea of building competence, and that's a very important idea in family's ability to deal with stressor events and for couples to deal with problems in their relationship. If you've gotten through things in the past and you develop that shared memory, then what happens is the next time something comes along, you rely on one. You say, oh, we've done this. And if you can say, I've done this, or I've done something harder than this, then the problem facing you doesn't seem so hard, does it? And we're going to see when we talk about family stress, perceptions of the problem and perceptions of what you are as a system play a big role in families' ability to deal with stressor events in their lives. Crisis points. There was that time where, things were really bad. Somebody had an affair. Or we lost our home. What did we do? Or deaths and other kinds of events. These are event memories. Event memories, they can be special events, such as a birth, honeymoon. They could be extended events, such as that time period when my daughter was sick. Or they could be what we call epochal memories. Okay? These epochal memories are things that we use discrete events to characterize a whole period of time. So what would be a good example of an epochal memory? Maybe we want to think back to our family life when period of time when things were difficult maybe, or a period of time when we were, I don't know, if I think of my own family life, when my wife and I were living apart. I was teaching in Vancouver and she was in Bellingham, and we had this crazy commuter marriage, and it was a weird period of time. But that period of time, we would use a memory of a specific event or a few events that happened during that period of time to kind of capture the image of what happened on a regular basis during that period of time, or to capture some aspect of our family life that was represented in that event. So it may have been a 4th of July during that period of time. What was happening, what happened at that event that characterized the struggles that we had of having a commuter marriage. You want to say something?
No, I think I got it.
Okay. These are expressed in past tense, so historical time. Say, this is what happened. We did this. We talk about it in the past tense as discrete elements in time. The other kind, a second type of shared memories is what's called generalized routine memories. And these are characterizations of the nature and quality of family life in earlier life stages that reflect an attempt to make sense of current family life. There could be particularly salient qualities of interaction in institutionalized patterns of interaction. So a routinized, generalized routine memory is not about an event, but would be a characterization of family life during some period of time in our past. Like, whenever we had holidays, our aunt and uncle always came over. And we always sat around and talked, and the kids could have a drink. You know, they got a taste of a highball. It was usually and someone would bring the cookies, and we'd have a barbecue. Now, it's not about a specific event. It's about something that was a general pattern that occurred on a regular basis in our family life. And so those are called generalized routine memories. And so families develop both of these types of memories, both event memories as well as generalized routine memories. We make sense of what happened in the past. We don't just recall it and retell the story of it as a discrete event, but we also tend to characterize our family life. Now, how we characterize the family life, the ways in which these routines are presented in the storyline, is probably going to reflect something about how we see our family life today, or where we want to go in the future. And so we are likely to construct those events differently depending upon what our current circumstances are. And we go back and we rethink them. So we've had lots of things that happened in between. And now when we go back and think about it, either as a discrete event or as trying to characterize the interactions, we all of a sudden it wasn't maybe quite so nice. Or it wasn't quite as bad as we used to say it was. Yeah, Mom was always crazy. Well, she's older now, maybe she wasn't always crazy. She was just idiosyncratic. And so we reconstruct the memories because we have a different interest in the story. In this case, it might be repairing relationships that have been damaged in previous periods of time. And so we used to think negatively about those relationships, and now we're trying to repair those relationships. And so when we tell stories, we now kind of keep those things out that were the negatives, and we bring forward positives. Because what we're doing is trying to shape our current day relationships. So families use these memories and narratives in very dynamic ways over their life course. Generalized routine memories are expressed as fundamental principles, something called ritual time. They express what was the general characteristic of our life together. So an institution is basically a unit of patterned interaction. And so the institution of our family, basically its underlying meaning, its identity as a family, changed. It may not have changed at all, but our memory of it changes. And we reconstruct that memory. So it's things like, we used to do this. We always did this. And so we're creating not a specific memory, but a generalized memory. Another important idea in family memories and narratives is the idea of what's called narrative inheritance. And so stories of our family history, either intergenerational or intergenerational, that establish what we call a local mode of family identity. A local model, of family identity. So when we tell stories, we hand those stories down. So your grandparents probably have told you stories. Can you think of stories your grandparents have told you?
Like from their family past?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you remember sitting around and listening to the story, and you could probably retell that story. even though you're 2 generations removed. Did your parents tell you stories about life before you were born or before you were cognizant of yourself in the family? Right? And you can remember those stories. I remember all the stories of my mother's life. She told them all the time. She still tells them all the time. Right? And it's telling me that, you know, she had a uniqueness in her family life that would set her apart in her family life from other families. And because I am part of her heritage, those experiences have been transferred to me in some way. And so when I think, for example, of my focus on education in my life growing up and the value that was placed on it in my family life and the kinds of ways in which my family was organized to promote education, I can't separate that from her experiences when she was younger growing up and the things that she was denied because she grew up in the Depression. And so those things carry forward in terms of my understanding of what my family life was like growing up, because I had a mother who had these stories of her family life, and that gets passed on from generation to generation. And so that's sort of a uniqueness about my family that has this element in it. And then in addition to that, I know the stories of my parents and the life in my family before I was born, and the stories about when I was young, and all of those go into this idea of, hey, you are pretty unique. Not just as an individual, but you're unique as a unit. That this is the Bulcroft family. These stories contain that image. And so it can be intergenerational or intragenerational. So it could be within a generation or across generations, these stories. So when I go home and visit my siblings, we tell stories. We tell stories of our life together. We tell stories of our past. And every time we tell a story, we're creating this uniqueness. We did these things together. Other people may be in the story, but they come and go. Right? The other parts of the story, they're always the same. Always the same people. That's us. That's who we are as a family. What makes us distinct as a group versus others who share our social cultural location, and versus what makes us distinct as individuals. So, you know, white middle class Anglo American. That's what I am. I share that with a lot of white middle class Anglo Americans. That doesn't make me unique. I mean, it's some of what I have, but I have a special slant to it. I see myself as a particular kind of Anglo-American white middle-class person. And I, in fact, see my whole family that way. We run our family not according to fixed sets of norms or fixed cultural traditions. We might incorporate them, but we're not defined by them. We've transformed them into our own. And that's how we do it, is through narrative, through storytelling. And that's what we call our narrative inheritance. And what are the central themes or concerns that justify and legitimate our existence and organization? So one really great article that I didn't have you read, but in future classes might have as an assignment, is an article about a family that adopts a Vietnamese boy. And they tell stories about why they adopted a Vietnamese boy. Why they didn't, what were the things that defined them as a couple at the time to take on this responsibility. They already had 2 girls, and they weren't particularly interested in adopting another child, but they went to these workshops, and when they went to these workshops for some other reason, they wound up getting attached to this boy, and eventually the boy incorporates himself into their family. So it's this whole storyline about why they have a Vietnamese boy that they've adopted. And since it's an unusual situation, it kind of requires the whole story. And so they've really developed the story. When they get together with people, they tell the story to everybody. And what it does is it shows who they are and what they're about, what are their values, why they look the way they look, and in some ways it legitimizes that condition. My wife and I always tell the story of why we have a Puerto Rican foster son. How did we get this boy? You know, it's a really interesting story. Can't tell the whole thing now, maybe some other time after class. But it goes on and on and on about events that happen over time. My wife's life prior to knowing me, it involves him being involved in our first meeting and going on our first date. It has his, you know, it has all of these sort of unfolding processes that led to him being just like any other son would be. And for our daughter, what he would be as a brother. And the story legitimizes ourself as a unique kind of family in a way that you would think, how do you manage that kind of situation? But my daughter, because we've told her the story and she knows the story, she knew it from the very early age. She's heard the story many times by the time she goes to kindergarten. And she, you know, she goes to kindergarten, she tells the teacher she has a Puerto Rican brother. And the teacher thinks, well, this is a middle class, you know, white family. What are they doing with a Puerto Rican? No, you must be making it up. They thought it was fictional. Because he was like 18 years old at the time when she was born. So it's like, oh, how did that happen? And so then the story gets out to her. And then all of a sudden, we're a different family in their eyes. Our daughter's a different person in their eyes. She's part of this different kind of unique group. So you create your uniqueness. You justify yourself. You legitimize your position in the larger social system by telling these stories. And that's what, in this article about adoption, they do this a lot. It also helps members understand their situation. So this story also has, this article also talks about, there's a pumpkin story, and it's about how the two older girls show up one day on the doorstep pretending that they're orphans. And they go through this whole scenario with the parents about eventually saying, oh, you can come live with us because of all these circumstances in your life. And basically the girls are telling the parents, here's how we understand why we wound up with this Vietnamese son or brother. And in the storytelling, it confirms and provides a justification for their uniqueness in this regard. And so this is the idea of so that goes back to central theme. So the central theme here in the adoption story is, hey, we're a family that's about international adoption. We're a family that's about providing a place for somebody who's in really dire, whose life is really bad, is in dire circumstances, and really needs help, and isn't privileged by American society. And we're a kind of family that goes and does that. And guess what? That is our focus in our life. It's to provide places for people like that. I tell stories like this to my classes all the time. My family is huge. I have one daughter. I have one biological daughter. I have 3 or 4, can't even keep count of them anymore, daughters of the heart from other countries, because we got to be an international family through taking in exchange students over time and sustaining those connections, etc. And that really defines us as a family. People will talk about our families, oh, besides having a Puerto Rican foster son and having a Mexican-American woman who actually bought a house with us at one point in time and moved from Minnesota to Washington with us because she became such a close friend and a second mother to our daughter, you say, my family is complex. I'm obviously not a family that is very rigid, right? I'm a family that's really open, really willing to open up its boundaries. So telling those stories, every time I tell that story and every time my wife and I together tell a story in particular, it's saying, here's what we're about. Here's what our uniqueness is. Here's how, in the future, we're probably going to make decisions. Because we're going to make decisions in our life in ways that reflect the values that led to those kinds of occurrences. And so this narrative inheritance, what did you inherit? My daughter's inherited all of this. She knows all these stories. you can imagine what kind of family she'll construct, if she ever constructs one. What are the outcomes of these family narratives? They strengthen affective ties to the family we have participated in over time. So whenever we tell a story, whenever it gets transferred, it's saying, hey, you know, I understand you. There's an emotional investment there. I understand how you felt at that time. And so that strengthens those affective ties. A sense of continuity and competence as a family. A sense that we have a history. That we're not just for the here and now. We have a past, which means we probably have a future. And we're going to go forward. Means of passing on family goals and patterns. So again, what kind of family will my wife and I pass on to our daughter? You can imagine, she's probably going to have a model of family life that's premised on these stories. Stories about the family she grew up in before she arrived and afterwards. And the way that story is constructed. She's probably going to have in her family a pattern of interaction that fits the kinds of interactions that happened in the past that are contained in the story. The kinds of relationships between the husband and the wife, between the parents and their child. The ways of treating each other. And places current life situation in historical perspective that enhances understanding and clarity. Okay? Life isn't so great. How did we get here? How do we make sense of why we're the way we are at the moment? Well, it has something to do with the past. And sometimes that helps us understand that maybe it's not all bad. Maybe it's just, this is circumstances. And so we adjust to it. Or maybe we look back and we say, oh, we could have done things differently then. Let's do them differently now so we don't repeat the mistake. You have greater clarity of how you got to where you are and what might be options for you today in terms of making changes. Another aspect of memories and narratives is the actual performance of the narrative, what we call storytelling. And these are called moments of lived experience that create family identity in the here and now by telling stories about the past. And so every time a family gets together and tells a story, it's a dance. People are responding to each other. One person moves this way, the other person moves with them, and maybe shifts and goes a different direction. Or adds something on. If you think of your own family storytelling events, you can imagine people throwing things in there. Oh, don't forget this, or yeah, but you know, you're forgetting, or we also did this. And so you're adding stuff in, and then sometimes you have to make an agreement. Well, I didn't think it was that way, but I did. Every time my wife tells a story, and I'm there, I'm always correcting her. I said, no, that didn't happen that way. We didn't do it in that order. Not all the time. Because sometimes I think, well, it's not important what actually happened. Sometimes what's important is maintaining the connection, maintaining the agreement. Right? And so stories evolve. Family members engage and negotiate, talk, take the role of the other, and cooperate together, more or less, in fashioning the story. We think about what the other person was thinking about when they engaged in that behavior in the past. That requires us to think like the other person. That means we understand that person better. We have to, in order to make the story make sense. We have to anticipate what they're going to say and how they're going to react to what we say. And we have to cooperate to some degree. Or the story never unfolds, it just unravels. We have to find that the story has to have a direction. It has to have a theme that runs through it. So in doing this, some people participate, others don't. Some participate more, some participate less. Are stories in your family told by your parents, or are they kind of a joint operation where everybody is contributing to the construction of the story? Who participates? It says something about the nature of your family life. Just by listening to people tell stories, you can kind of understand how they're organized. Do they allow children to have inputs into the storytelling process? Who controls the narrative? So who's the one that really directs where the story is going to go? And each story might be different. in terms of who directs the narrative. And how are disputes resolved? How do you come to an agreement? And do you? And that's saying something about you as a family and what you're about. These moments also reinforce family bonds in the telling by validating each other's contributions. Like I said, sometimes it's better to agree than to challenge. Right? I understand why this is important, that this scenario goes this way. And when I put my blinders on and I say, I know it happened differently, but I'm going to go with you and I'm going to continue the story from your point of view. Basically, I'm validating you. Every time my wife tells a story, I know she knows it didn't happen that way. Not every time, but because she doesn't do it every time, but when she does it, I know she knows it didn't happen that way. But it's important for her to make sense of it that way. And so I go along. And that's a validation. That's good, I think. Put words in my wife's mouth without her being here. She doesn't see the tape. It's a means of conveying family identity to others and thereby eliciting, validating, reflected appraisals, these narrative performances. So we tell the stories to other people. And we tell the stories to other people get to understand us. Other people say, oh, well, that's interesting. Other people in the future act towards us with that knowledge. And so they expect us to do things differently or to act differently because we have that shared family history. They now understand us. And so what happens when people react to you in consistent ways? It builds identity, right? Reflective appraisals. And then finally, there's something called narrative momentum, that when you tell stories, these stories have a time movement in them. Stories are ever evolving with each retelling. They're constantly changing. And as they change, they push the family in a direction. Okay? Stories blend our perspective of the past with our current life conditions and point us in a direction for the future. They tell us, okay, this was the past as we see it from the lens of what we are today. And how we tell that story and how we fashion that story then says, it's almost like making a commitment to go in a particular direction. When I tell you that we've had international daughters and we've adopted a son who's Puerto Rican and we've had a woman who's Mexican American living with us, I am saying that, you know, if an opportunity comes along again, probably going to go that direction. That's the second time I've done that. So it gives us a direction for the future. So the narrative is also an important element of family cultures. We tell these stories all the time. The stories are creating memory. At the same time, they're creating family identity. And they're enhancing those bonds that we have with each other. They're giving us a sense of perspective on what we're facing today. And as we'll see when we talk about family stress theory, that can be really, really important. And it's why these narratives and memories, as contained in what we call the perceptions aspect of family stress reactions, can be really important in a family's ability to overcome difficulties. As important as ritual. So last time we talked about ritual and how ritual can really help a family along. This is similar in that regard. It's an element of culture that can really help a family deal with its current situations because they have these memories that are constructed and because they are capable of engaging in narrative storytelling. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about in this regard is developing a family legacy, and that was the reading that you had due for the last reading response, one of the two readings. And family legacy is a socially constructed belongingness among members of a multi-generational family group. And so the idea, the concept of family legacy in the article is concerns how do families create a culture in which generations are tied together, right? In particular, the article was focused on the elderly and how the elderly develop personal legacy and how that's tied into family legacy, right? And so in that article, it talks about 3 family competencies that enhance the development of family integrity. 3 things that make a family feel like, make the members of a family feel like it has a togetherness to it. It has a it has a history and has an ongoing movement into the future. That it has a continuity to it, and that members are still tied to it, and therefore get something out of it. And so the 3 competencies that they talk about, the first is the ability to transform relationships over time while maintaining commitments to family system and preserving meaning of the family as an ongoing entity. So how do we transform our relationships over time? And this is in the context of an elderly person, right? So the person was a parent at one time, and then as the children grew, they left home and now had a period of time probably as independent, and the children are off doing their thing, and then gradually now is elderly and starts maybe leaning more on the older adult children, while at the same time maybe also giving them something, right? Having an exchange. And so how well is the family able to move from one of those stages to the next? Are they able to transform those relationships? You're probably in the process of transforming the relationships in your own family right now, right? You moved out, went to college, and so now, look, Mom and Dad, when I come home, the rules have to be different, right? And you're going to have to accept that I'm doing something separate on my own. I'm at that different stage in my life. And if you can accept that, then we can work out what our new relationship is going to be. It's not going to be the same, but it doesn't mean that it's diminished. It can be just as important. It can be just as significant. And so we can still show that we have commitment to the family system, and we can preserve meanings of what we are about as a family and as a mother and daughter, or father and daughter, or son. But it's different now. And if we can come to an agreed upon idea of what that relationship is like now, as opposed to in the past, and what are the important elements of it, then we're going to be able to go forward in this new state, still as the same family we always were. Okay? So that transformation is really important. It's actually one of the things that happens, especially for women, when their children start to leave home. And it takes a while, and there's a period of time of negotiation, but what they have to do is take away that idea that they are the mother, and they are the person who's the nurturer and the protector and all that, and they have to, oh no, we're kind of equal, and now you're my friend, you're my companion. Yeah, I still care for you, but it's a different kind of caring. That's a transformation. And that's what they're talking about when say the ability to transform these relationships while maintaining commitment to family system and preserving meaning of the family as an ongoing entity. Previous meaning systems and relationship patterns may need to be reinterpreted to accommodate new meanings in relationships. So now when you look back at that period of time, it may have been difficult. But you say, oh, it was that part of transforming ourselves. And the story becomes one of transformation rather than one of separation. And just as an example, in the young adult kind of transition out of families. Second, the ability to resolve and accept past losses, disappointments, or conflicts. And this includes unresolved losses, disappointments, or conflicts create fracture points in family system integrity. So every family isn't perfect, right? Every family goes through periods of time in which there's conflict and sometimes really damaging kinds of conflicts that happen. And at the time, they're considered to be traumatic. They're considered to be fractioning that family. A sign that the family didn't work. And many times it could be many hurt feelings. And so the family goes forward as a less integrated, a lower integrity unit. What families do to sustain or to create integrity is they need to be able to go back and look at those times and reinterpret them. Whereas a fight between a parent and a child in adolescence may have been interpreted as one of him trying to hurt his mother, or the mother being obstinate and stubborn, or the father being obstinate and stubborn. That's how they both saw it, respectively. Now it's, oh, we go back and think, well, I understand now what was going on in your life, and the son or daughter says, yeah, and I understand, the pressures that you were under, and you resolve that, and you say, okay, it happened. But it didn't mean that we weren't family. And you bring that back into the system. Instead of having that separation and breaking the bonds, you basically kind of wrap a rubber band around it, if you will, right? I used to graft roses. You know how you graft a rose? You slice a bud off of one rose that you want to grow, and you slice a little hole in the rootstock of another bud, and you stick the bud in there, and you wrap it with a band. And if you can keep it wrapped long enough, the bud becomes part of the other rose, and it grows. In a sense, that's what we're doing here. Except the bud is from the same rose. It broke off, and you're putting it back on. Right? And so that's a sort of a grafting, if you will. Now that happens only if there's some level of forgiveness, or at least some level of reinterpretation of what were the motivations behind those events. What were those members intending? What was driving their behaviors? How did they feel about their behaviors? Do they feel bad that they did the things they did? That's a long way to going to saying, oh, okay, we can overcome that. And so if you can repair these things, then that really facilitates the development of family integrity. And so when people get older, if they're embittered about their family life, and if there's no repair work being done because there were hard things that happened in their past at some points in time, then they become very alienated from family, and they don't have family integrity. And that leads them being lonely, being isolated, and less happy, and less healthy. And so the best you can do for families is always to try to help them repair those intergenerational ties. But it requires a lot of work, because it requires rethinking, to go back to the idea of memories, rethinking what those events were. What happened during those events? What happened since? How things unfolded in a way that you can see it in a positive light, or at least a light in which says, yeah, we still are family, and we still have those obligations for each other. And that's an important element of developing family integrity. Now, obviously, it would be better if you didn't have those traumatic events. If you were able to do this first step and transform them properly, then you're not going to run into those as much. And then the third is the ability to create intergenerational meaning and legacy through stories and ritual. And that's what we've been talking about when we talk about narrative and memories. It's important that elderly people be able to participate in the storytelling aspect of their children's families, that they're integrated in that regard, that they're asked to tell those stories to their grandchildren. Because every time they tell the story to the grandchildren, they're creating that connection. They're creating that family integrity, which for them as they get older and older, is going to be really critical to their well-being. And so that's what this article is really concerned about, the well-being of the elderly person, and tying the family to being an important element of that well-being. And that can't happen without the family legacy. The legacy needs to have this intergenerational storytelling, these intergenerational narratives. And it's not just for the elderly person, but the younger generation family gets something from it too. That there are values and there are ideas contained in those stories that tell the family what they're about beyond their immediate life, that they're tied to another generation, they're tied to the values of another generation. You know, my mother's stories about growing up in the Depression go a long way in establishing the transcendent values of my family today. Life in the Depression. You're too young to even think about this, right? Actually, one of the best books ever written in family sociology was called Children of the Great Depression. And it's about family life growing up during the Great Depression in the 1930s. My mother doesn't have to read this book. She could write the book. Because that's when she grew up. And the hardships and the kind of family unifications that happened during that period of time in the face of those hardships, they're powerful stories. And the way in which people helped each other, all of that was part of their family. How their family took in people because they were okay. And there were other people who weren't okay and needed to be taken in. Part of the story. Part of what my mother's family wound up being about when she got older, and probably what my family, a lot about what my family today is about, ties into those stories. And they come from this storytelling that we engage in, and to some degree rituals, the practices that we use to celebrate the important things that are valued in our life, particularly celebrations of cultural significance, which then pass on those cultural values. Okay, it's enough for family culture. Like I said, we're going to come back to family culture in a little bit when we talk about the family stress models. And so we'll take a break and then we'll move on to talk about family stress.